SpongeBob SquarePants might be one of the most cheerful shows ever made, but underneath all the jellyfishing and bubble blowing, there's a darker side that quietly scarred an entire generation of kids with psychological horror, body horror, and emotional trauma when we least expected it. In this video, we're diving deep into the most disturbing episode lore in SpongeBob history. And keep watching because we'll reveal the one episode so twisted that even the voice actor said it was too disturbing to record. But before we continue the video, make sure to like the video. You know what's crazy? Everyone remembers Rock Bottom from season 1 as that weird episode where SpongeBob gets lost and fish talk funny. But honestly, when you actually watch what happens to our yellow buddy, this episode is straight up traumatic. Picture this, you're having the best day ever at an amusement park with your best friend. SpongeBob and Patrick just spent the whole day at Glove World. They're happy, they're laughing, everything's perfect. Then, boom, wrong bus. One stupid mistake and suddenly SpongeBob's entire world falls apart. The thing that gets me is how quickly everything goes from fun to absolute disaster. That bus ride down the cliff is terrifying. SpongeBob and Patrick are literally screaming as they plummet into this dark alien world. And when they land in Rock Bottom, you can see the panic in SpongeBob's eyes. This place looks like the opposite of everything he knows. It's dark, weird, and full of strange, deep-sea creatures that talk in a way he can't understand. But here's where it gets really sad. Patrick, his best friend in the world, just leaves him. I know it was an accident, but imagine being SpongeBob in that moment. You're already scared and confused, and then the one person who could help you literally drives away. The way SpongeBob chases after that bus, running until he can't breathe, calling Patrick's name, that's pure desperation right there. What makes this episode so brutal is watching SpongeBob's hope slowly die. At first, he's optimistic. I'll just wait for the next bus, he thinks. Easy, right? Wrong. The universe decides to torture this poor guy. Every single time he tries to do something normal, tie his shoe, get a snack, anything, a bus shows up and leaves without him. That candy machine scene is psychological torture. SpongeBob's starving, he just wants one piece of candy, but every time he reaches for it, a bus appears. It's like the world is playing this sick game with him. When that other fish steals his candy after all that struggle, you can see something break inside SpongeBob. The bus station scene hits even harder. SpongeBob waits in line for hours, maybe all day. He's 329th in line. Can you imagine standing there watching hundreds of people go before you, knowing you just want to go home? And when he finally gets to the front, when he finally thinks he's made it, the bus leaves literally 5 seconds early. 5 seconds. But the real gut punch comes when the lights go out. SpongeBob's trying so hard to stay positive, making jokes about being alone in the dark. Then his glove light dies and suddenly he's facing what he calls advanced darkness. That line became a meme, but think about what it really means. When SpongeBob starts hearing those raspberry sounds in the darkness, he completely loses it. He goes from walking to running to sprinting, pure panic taking over. This cheerful, optimistic sponge who always sees the best in everything is now terrified and alone, running blindly through a place that feels like another planet. The really messed up part? None of this had to happen. If SpongeBob and Patrick had just paid attention to where they were going, if the bus driver had been more helpful, if Patrick had waited just a few more minutes, any of these tiny changes would have prevented this nightmare. Instead, SpongeBob suffers for hours because of one small mistake. What gets me most is how the episode shows loneliness in such a real way. SpongeBob mentions feeding Gary. He's worried about his pet snail waiting at home. He thinks about his normal life, his routine, all the simple things he takes for granted. Rock Bottom strips all of that away and forces him to face his worst fear, being completely alone and helpless. The ending tries to be happy with the anglerfish helping him fly home, but think about the trauma SpongeBob just went through. He spent an entire day and night lost, scared, hungry, and abandoned. That changes a person. Sure, he gets home safely, but what about the emotional scars? And Patrick? He's riding another bus back to Rock Bottom at the end, thinking he's being a good friend. He has no idea what SpongeBob just survived. That's almost worse. Your best friend can't even comprehend the nightmare you just experienced. Rock Bottom shows us that sometimes it's about feeling lost and alone, about everything going wrong at once, about hope slowly draining away. SpongeBob's night in Rock Bottom is a masterclass in quiet desperation, wrapped up in a kid's cartoon that most people remember for raspberry sounds and weird fish. That's what makes this episode so powerful and so heartbreaking. Underneath all the silly voices and strange creatures, it's really about one of our worst nightmares, being completely alone in a place where nothing makes sense and nobody can help you. Rock Bottom shows how fear comes from being lost and alone, but Graveyard Shift proves it's worse when someone you trust is the one who scares you. Graveyard Shift. Here's something that'll blow your mind. Graveyard Shift from season 2 is actually one of the meanest things Squidward ever does to SpongeBob. Everyone remembers it as that spooky episode episode with the hash-slinging slasher, but they're missing the real story here. SpongeBob starts the episode absolutely loving life. Mr. Krabs just announced the Krusty Krab is open 24 hours, and while Squidward is miserable, SpongeBob is absolutely thrilled. He's singing his little heart out, doing his job with pure joy, cleaning everything at night like it's the most exciting thing in the world. This guy finds happiness in the smallest things, and working the night shift is like a dream come true for him. Then Squidward ruins everything. When SpongeBob shows just a tiny bit of nervousness about taking out the trash in the dark, Squidward sees an opportunity to mess with SpongeBob's head for his own entertainment, and that's exactly what he does. The hash-slinging slasher story is mental torture. Squidward makes up this tale just to scare SpongeBob on purpose. He watches SpongeBob's face, sees the fear building, and keeps going. When SpongeBob tries to guess what the slasher did wrong, forgot the sauce, didn't wash his hands, Squidward keeps saying no, dragging out the suspense until he delivers the brutal punchline about cutting off his hand. But here's what makes it really cruel. Squidward doesn't stop there. He adds all these horrible details about getting hit by a bus, being fired at his own funeral, and coming back for revenge. Then he describes exactly how the ghost will kill them, step by step, watching SpongeBob fall apart with each word. The saddest thing, SpongeBob screams for 20 straight seconds. 20 seconds of pure terror from a guy who was just happy to be working, and Squidward laughs the entire time. He thinks it's hilarious that he just traumatized someone who trusts him. When Squidward finally admits it was a joke, SpongeBob tries to bounce back like always, but the damage is done. You can see it in how he reacts later when the signs start happening. That innocent joy he had about the night shift, gone. Now he's constantly looking over his shoulder, waiting for something horrible to happen, and then karma hits hard. When the lights start flickering, Squidward thinks SpongeBob is trying to get revenge by pranking him, but when he realizes nobody's touching the switch, panic sets in. The phone rings with silence. The walls ooze slime. Everything from his made-up story starts coming true, and suddenly Squidward is the one falling apart. The bus scene is pure terror for both of them. When that shadowy figure steps off with what looks like a spatula, Squidward completely loses it. Hair grows from his head as he screams, and SpongeBob starts crying. Not just from fear, but because he thinks Squidward cares enough about him to dress up and entertain him. Even in his terror, SpongeBob still believes the best about people. When they think they're about to die, both characters reveal their deepest truths. Squidward admits he's always sort of liked SpongeBob, the closest thing to an apology we'll ever get. And SpongeBob, he confesses to using Squidward's clarinet to unclog his toilet. Think about that. Facing death, SpongeBob's biggest guilt is about a harmless prank. The episode tries to end on a happy note when the slasher turns out to be just a guy looking for a job. Everyone laughs about Nosferatu messing with the lights, but the emotional damage is already done. Squidward deliberately destroyed SpongeBob's happiness and then suffered the consequences of his own cruelty. Looking at this episode, what makes it so sad is how Squidward treats SpongeBob. SpongeBob looks up to Squidward, trusts him, wants his approval, and Squidward uses that trust to hurt him for fun. He takes SpongeBob's vulnerability and turns it against him for entertainment. Here's the thing that gets me. This happens everywhere. Someone you think is your friend tells you something that scares you, then laughs when you believe them. They call it just a joke when you get upset, like your feelings don't matter. But the fear they planted in your head doesn't just disappear. SpongeBob started that night excited about spending hours working with Squidward. He thought it would be like a sleepover. Instead, he learned how mean people can be when they're bored and angry with their own lives. The episode is funny because we're watching cartoon characters doing silly things, but take away the animation and you've got a story about someone being mean at work, hurting someone's feelings on purpose, and how fear can ruin even the happiest moments. SpongeBob never deserved to have his joy taken away like that, and Squidward, he learned firsthand that the fear you spread has a way of coming back to haunt you. The saddest thing about Graveyard Shift is watching someone's pure happiness get crushed by someone they trusted. That's real horror right there. Graveyard Shift shows how Squidward uses fear to crush SpongeBob's joy, but in SpongeBob Meets the Strangler, it's SpongeBob who becomes the one quietly doing the crushing. On the surface, it looks like a simple episode where SpongeBob accidentally hires a serial killer as his bodyguard. But dig deeper, and you'll find one of the most twisted examples of mind games in cartoon history. The setup seems normal enough. SpongeBob's doing his job cleaning up litter when some guy starts throwing trash everywhere. SpongeBob calls the cops like any good citizen would, then Squidward drops the bomb. This is the Tattletale Strangler, a guy who literally murders people for snitching on him. Most people would run and hide, but SpongeBob, he hires the guy as his bodyguard. Now, here's where it gets really messed up. The show wants you to think SpongeBob is too dumb to realize his bodyguard is actually the Strangler in a fake mustache. But watch closely and you'll see SpongeBob is playing the most twisted game of psychological torture ever put in a kid's cartoon. First, SpongeBob drags the Strangler on the worst shopping trip ever. They spend hours at the grocery store while SpongeBob debates which paper towels to buy. Then it's off to the dry cleaner where SpongeBob suddenly can't remember if those are his pants. Next stop, the perfume store, where SpongeBob makes the Strangler smell different fragrances. The Strangler is getting more and more frustrated, and SpongeBob knows it. Every time the guy tries to hurry things along, SpongeBob finds another excuse to waste time. The poor criminal just wants to get somewhere private so he can do his murdering, but SpongeBob keeps him trapped in public spaces with witnesses everywhere. Then comes the house key situation, and this is where things get really dark. SpongeBob spends 20 minutes pretending he can't find his key while the Strangler steams with rage. But the second they need to get inside, SpongeBob casually mentions the spare key under the mat. He knew it was there the whole time. He was torturing this guy on purpose. But SpongeBob's not done yet. When the Strangler suggests climbing through the window, SpongeBob puts on spiky cleats and literally steps on the man's eyeballs for 6 hours. Think about that. 6 hours of metal spikes grinding into someone's corneas while SpongeBob pretends it's an accident. That's not clumsiness, that's sadistic. The parties are the real masterpiece though. SpongeBob somehow managed to invite everyone in town to multiple surprise parties at his house. You don't accidentally send out invitations for your own surprise party. He planned this whole thing knowing the Strangler would be trapped there with dozens of witnesses, unable to do anything but sit in a chair and watch his victims celebrate. Every time the Strangler thinks he finally has SpongeBob alone, another crowd shows up. The guy's mental state is completely falling apart while SpongeBob acts like everything is perfectly normal. When Patrick shows up and SpongeBob suggests he might be the Strangler, Patrick actually believes it and turns himself in. Even SpongeBob's best friend is more self-aware than this supposedly innocent sponge. The chase scene at the end reveals just how calculated everything was. SpongeBob follows the Strangler everywhere, in taxis, on planes, even when the guy jumps out with a parachute. The most chilling moment comes when the Strangler finally breaks down and reveals his true identity. SpongeBob acts shocked, but think about it. He just spent an entire day systematically destroying this criminal's sanity. He turned a dangerous killer into a crying mess who voluntarily throws himself in jail just to get away from him. The episode ends with the Strangler in prison thinking he's finally safe, only to discover Patrick is his cellmate. Even behind bars, SpongeBob's influence is still torturing this guy. The last thing we hear is Patrick asking what the Strangler is in for, and you can see the man's soul completely give up. What makes this episode truly scary is realizing that SpongeBob is way smarter and more manipulative than anyone thinks. He takes a serial killer and breaks him mentally using nothing but fake cheerfulness and perfectly timed annoyances. The Strangler is supposed to be the monster in this story, but SpongeBob turns him into a victim through pure psychological warfare. He never gets violent, never loses his temper, never drops his innocent act. He just smiles and slowly drives a grown man insane. This episode shows us that SpongeBob's greatest weapon, his ability to make people underestimate him while he completely destroys their minds. The scariest part? He does it all while maintaining his reputation as the nicest guy in Bikini Bottom. The real horror of SpongeBob meets the Strangler is that SpongeBob was the killer all along, the kind that uses weapons. SpongeBob meets the Strangler turns SpongeBob into a silent manipulator who mentally breaks a killer. But SquidBob Tentacle Pants goes even darker by turning friendship itself into a grotesque, flesh-melting nightmare. SquidBob Tentacle Pants from season 4 is straight up body horror. This episode takes the innocent concept of teleportation and turns it into something that belongs in a David Cronenberg movie. What we get is 11 minutes of pure nightmare that somehow made it past Nickelodeon censors. Squidward's having this dream where he's finally a famous clarinet player, getting all the applause he's ever wanted. Then his alarm goes off and reality hits. Another day at the Krusty Krab. Then SpongeBob visits Sandy, who's built this fancy matter transporter that can move things instantly from one place to another. She demonstrates by zapping an apple onto Mrs. Puff's desk. Cool technology, right? Wrong. This machine is about to create an abomination. SpongeBob asks if the transporter can get him to work faster. Sandy agrees to test it on a living creature for the first time. Red flag number 1 right there, never be the first test subject for experimental technology. But SpongeBob hops in anyway because he's chronically late for work. The teleportation starts fine, but then disaster strikes. As SpongeBob materializes at the Krusty Krab, Squidward happens to be walking by. Part of Squidward's arm gets caught in SpongeBob's body during the transport. Then, Sandy's remote control goes crazy and zaps them both back to her lab. What emerges from that machine is pure horror. SpongeBob and Squidward are now one creature. SpongeBob's regular head sits where it should, but Squidward's head is sticking out of the upper left side of the body like some kind of parasitic twin. They share arms, but in the worst possible way. SpongeBob controls Squidward's hand while Squidward controls SpongeBob's hand. They can't move without fighting each other. The visual is absolutely disturbing. Two separate personalities trapped in one malformed body, neither able to escape. Squidward's face shows pure terror and disgust at being stuck to SpongeBob forever. Meanwhile, SpongeBob thinks this is great because now they can be best buddies and do everything together. The irony is sickening. Sandy tries to fix her mistake by using the transporter again. What follows is a sequence that gets darker with each attempt. First, they appear at a kid's birthday party, traumatizing everyone. Then they materialize as a newborn baby in a hospital, causing the mother to scream in horror. Next, they pop up between two alien creatures trying to have a romantic moment. Each failed attempt shows how wrong this fusion really is. They don't belong anywhere because they're not supposed to exist. They're a mistake, an accident that keeps getting passed around like nobody wants to deal with them. Back at the Krusty Krab, their work life becomes impossible. They crash through the kitchen on a bike because they can't coordinate their movements. When they try to cook, SpongeBob can't reach ingredients while Squidward's head keeps flying around uncontrollably. Mr. Krabs takes one look at this mess and kicks them out, telling them not to come back until they fix their problem. The episode gets really sad when you see Squidward practicing clarinet while fused to SpongeBob. He has this big recital coming up, his chance to finally be recognized as a real artist. But how can he perform like this? His dream is dying because of this fusion. When they try to go home, their houses literally crash together because they can't separate. Even their homes are rejecting this unnatural state. Everything about their existence is wrong. The recital scene is where things get truly twisted. Squidward's so desperate to perform that he wears a cape to hide SpongeBob. But when the cape tears off and reveals their fused form, something unexpected happens. The audience loves it. They cheer for this freak show. For a brief moment, Squidward experiences the fame he's always wanted, but it's built on people staring at him like he's a circus act, not appreciating his music. Then Sandy shows up with her molecular separator ray to fix them. Squidward tries to stop her because he finally has an audience, but it's too late. They get separated, and immediately the crowd hates his regular clarinet playing. His moment of fame disappears instantly. Here's where the episode becomes truly horrifying. Squidward, desperate to get his audience back, grabs the separator ray and starts pushing buttons randomly. Sandy warns him it's sensitive equipment, but he won't listen. The machine overloads and explodes. Then we see Squidward in a therapist's office, and when the camera pulls back, he's fused with everyone who was at the recital. SpongeBob, Patrick, Sandy, Mr. Krabs, Pearl, Mrs. Puff, they're all melted together into this disgusting flesh-colored blob with random body parts sticking out. These characters have lost their individual identities completely. They're stuck in this writhing mass of limbs and faces, probably forever. Squidward says, "It all started when I was born," suggesting his entire existence has led to this moment of ultimate horror. What makes this episode so disturbing is how it plays with our basic fear of losing bodily autonomy, being trapped in someone else's body, unable to control your own movements, watching your identity disappear. These are primal terrors that tap into something deep and uncomfortable. The episode also explores how desperate people become for acceptance. Squidward was willing to stay fused to SpongeBob just to keep an audience that was laughing at him, not with him. That's psychological horror right there. SquidBob Tentacle Pants proves that SpongeBob could do serious horror when it wanted to. This episode belongs in the same category as body horror classics, just with more jokes and less blood. But the fear is real and it stays with you long after the credits roll. SquidBob Tentacle Pants ends with everyone trapped in a disgusting fused body, but To Love a Patty is somehow worse because it turns love into obsession and ends with SpongeBob eating rotten meat. To Love a Patty from season 5 is one of the most disturbing SpongeBob episodes ever made, and most people don't even realize it. What looks like a silly story about SpongeBob loving his food is actually a twisted tale of obsession, denial, and eating rotting meat that would make any health inspector scream. SpongeBob's making Krabby Patties at work when he creates one that looks particularly good. He gives it little condiment features: lettuce hair, tomato eyes, a pickle nose, ketchup cheeks, and a mustard smile. He calls her Patty, and immediately falls head over heels in love. Now, loving your cooking is normal. Being proud of a perfect burger makes sense. But SpongeBob crosses into creepy territory real fast. When customers want to eat the patty, SpongeBob literally screams, "No, I can't let them eat you," and steals the burger away from paying customers. Think about this for a second. SpongeBob is so obsessed with a piece of food that he's willing to sabotage his job and upset customers. He replaces Patty with a burger that has his actual shoe in it, and the customer somehow loves it. Already we're in weird territory. But then SpongeBob takes Patty home and treats her like a real girlfriend. He talks to her, makes plans with her, and completely ignores his actual friends Patrick and Sandy when they want to hang out. Patrick is devastated, saying, "I've been replaced by a sandwich." The episode shows SpongeBob choosing an object over human relationships, which is genuinely sad and disturbing. The musical montage that follows is where things get really creepy. SpongeBob takes this rotting piece of meat on romantic dates all over town. They go dancing, eat cotton candy together, ride boats, and visit the beach. The whole time, SpongeBob is singing love songs to a burger while completely lost in his fantasy. When some scallops try to eat Patty, SpongeBob goes absolutely psychotic. He uses karate to literally murder 21 innocent sea creatures just to protect his moldy burger. That's not cute or funny. That's the behavior of someone who's completely lost touch with reality. SpongeBob commits mass animal murder for a sandwich. Then they go over a waterfall and Patty falls apart in the water. SpongeBob desperately tries to put her back together, but now she's soggy and gross. This is where any sane person would realize the food is ruined and throw it away, but SpongeBob's obsession has gone too deep. 6 hours later, Patty has completely spoiled. The episode shows her covered in mold, oozing gross liquids, and infested with maggots. The animators went all out, making this burger look absolutely revolting. Green slime dripping everywhere, chunks falling off, the whole thing basically decomposing in real time. But SpongeBob still thinks she's beautiful. He takes this rotting pile of disease to the Krusty Krab for a fancy dinner date, dressing up in a tuxedo and arriving in a limousine. The smell is so bad that other customers immediately leave the restaurant. Normal people would be disgusted and concerned for SpongeBob's mental health. When Squidward shows SpongeBob how gross the patty really is, revealing the maggots crawling through the rotting meat, SpongeBob still insists she's the most gorgeous creature in the sea. He's so deep in his delusion that he can't see reality anymore. The burger is literally decomposing in front of him, and he still thinks it's perfect. Only when SpongeBob smells the rotting meat does he finally snap out of his obsession. He screams in horror when he sees what Patty has become, a disgusting mass of moldy, maggot-infested decay. But here's where the episode gets really dark. Mr. Krabs tells SpongeBob that Krabby Patties are meant to be loved and eaten, and that he once had a similar obsession with a burger that he eventually ate. So what does SpongeBob do? He eats the rotting, maggoty, moldy burger because he thinks that's what love means. Let that sink in. SpongeBob knowingly consumes spoiled meat crawling with maggots because he believes that's how you show love for food. In real life, eating something that rotten would put you in the hospital or possibly kill you. The episode ends with SpongeBob gagging and asking for a doggy bag, clearly sick from eating decomposed food. The whole episode is basically a study in mental illness. SpongeBob shows classic signs of obsessive behavior. He can't let go of the object of his fixation. He prioritizes it over real relationships. He becomes violent when it's threatened, and he refuses to accept reality even when confronted with obvious evidence. The romantic undertones make it even more disturbing. SpongeBob literally treats this burger like a romantic partner, taking it on dates and singing love songs to it. There are deleted scenes that showed them in bed together, which the creators thankfully removed because even they realized how creepy that was. To Love a Patty is horror disguised as comedy. It's about a man's descent into madness, his complete break from reality, and his willingness to harm himself and others for his obsession. The fact that it ends with him eating rotting meat just drives home how far gone he really is. Most kids watching this probably just saw the silly songs and cartoon violence, but adults should recognize this as a genuinely disturbing portrayal of mental breakdown and unhealthy obsession. SpongeBob needed therapy, not encouragement to eat spoiled food. To Love a Patty ends with SpongeBob eating a maggot-filled burger out of love, but the Splinter somehow goes further by turning a tiny injury into the most disgusting thing ever shown on the show. Before we continue the video, make sure to subscribe to our channel. The Splinter from season 6 is hands down the most disgusting episode SpongeBob ever made. This thing traumatized an entire generation of kids and honestly deserved every complaint it got from parents. What starts as a simple workplace accident turns into pure medical horror that has no business being in a children's cartoon. SpongeBob's having another great day at the Krusty Krab, being his usual cheerful self. He throws his spatula up to the ceiling and it gets stuck, so he climbs up to get it. Classic SpongeBob clumsiness, right? Then he slips on some tartar sauce and drags his thumb across the wooden floor. That's when everything goes wrong. SpongeBob gets a tiny splinter in his thumb. At first, it seems like no big deal, just a small piece of wood stuck in his finger, but the animators decided to make this splinter look absolutely revolting from the start. His thumb immediately turns red and swollen, and you can see this gross wooden spike poking out of his skin. SpongeBob tries to pull it out himself, but his weak arms can't handle it. When he tries to bite it out, his face literally peels off, showing his skeleton underneath. That's your first warning that this episode is going to places no kids show should go. Then Squidward makes everything worse. He sees the splinter and immediately starts messing with SpongeBob's head, telling him Mr. Krabs will send him home if he finds out about the injury. Squidward flushes SpongeBob's hat and spatula down the toilet and threatens to tell Mr. Krabs about the splinter. So SpongeBob panics and calls Patrick for help. Patrick shows up pretending to be a doctor, wearing a fake medical outfit from the the dumpster. This should have been funny, but what happens next is pure nightmare. Patrick takes one look at the splinter and decides the best way to remove it is to hammer it deeper into SpongeBob's thumb. He literally takes a wooden spike and a hammer and drives the splinter further into the wound. SpongeBob screams in pain as his thumb swells up to 10 times its normal size. This is where the episode crosses every line of good taste. SpongeBob's thumb becomes this massive, pulsing, grotesque balloon of infected flesh. The animators went all out, making it look as disgusting as possible. Veins bulging, skin stretched tight, the whole thing throbbing with each heartbeat. But Patrick's not done torturing SpongeBob yet. He decides the swelling needs treatment, so he grabs a handful of literal garbage and smears it all over the infected wound. Rotting food, slime, and who knows what else gets rubbed into SpongeBob's open injury. The results are horrifying. SpongeBob's thumb turns dark purple and starts oozing this sick green pus. The infection spreads visually across his skin while making disgusting fizzing sounds. Patrick takes one look at this medical disaster and basically says, "Not my problem," before leaving SpongeBob to suffer. When Mr. Krabs finally sees the splinter, even he's disgusted. The camera gives us multiple close-up shots of this infected, swollen, oozing mass of flesh where SpongeBob's thumb used to be. Mr. Krabs pulls the splinter out easily, but that's when things get truly gross. First, confetti shoots out of the wound like some twisted party favor. Then, without warning, a massive stream of green pus explodes from SpongeBob's thumb like a fire hose. Mr. Krabs has to shield himself with an umbrella while this stream of bodily fluid covers everything in sight. The sound effects make it even worse. You can hear the liquid splashing and splattering as it coats the kitchen. Only when the pus finally stops flowing does SpongeBob's thumb return to normal. What makes this episode so disturbing is how realistic the medical horror feels. Sure, the infection is exaggerated for a cartoon effect, but the basic progression, small wound, poor treatment, massive infection, gross drainage, follows real medical scenarios that people have actually experienced. The close-up shots linger way too long on the disgusting details. You see every bulging vein, every drop of pus, every moment of SpongeBob's pain and suffering. The animators clearly had way too much fun making this as revolting as possible. Kids who watched this episode didn't laugh. Parents complained to Nickelodeon about the content being too graphic for children. Some viewers still can't watch it today without feeling sick. The episode also has this weird sadistic streak where everyone makes SpongeBob's suffering worse. Squidward manipulates him psychologically, Patrick physically tortures him with fake medical treatment, and nobody shows any real concern for his obvious pain and distress. The Splinter proves that SpongeBob could do genuine horror when it wanted to. The fact that they aired this during kids' programming hours shows how completely the writers and network lost track of their audience. Children don't need to see infected wounds spurting pus for entertainment. That's trauma disguised as comedy. Even today, The Splinter stands as one of the most controversial SpongeBob episodes ever made. It's a masterclass in how to take a simple concept way too far and create something genuinely disturbing instead of genuinely funny. SpongeBob's painful injury shows one kind of horror, but what comes next is about ignoring real danger and hurting those closest to you. A Pal for Gary from season 7 is one of the most disturbing SpongeBob episodes ever made, but not for the reasons you'd expect. Sure, Puffy Fluffy is scary as hell, but the real horror comes from watching SpongeBob turn into an abusive, gaslighting monster who refuses to believe his own pet is being tortured right in front of his eyes. The episode starts with SpongeBob feeling guilty about leaving Gary alone while he works. Fair enough, that's actually responsible pet ownership thinking. Gary seems fine watching TV and eating snacks, but SpongeBob's guilt leads him to make the worst decision possible. He buys Gary a friend from some sketchy pet dealer who literally warns him that these creatures are dangerous and hostile toward other pets. The lady shows him pictures and explicitly tells him not to buy one, but SpongeBob completely ignores her because he thinks he knows better. This is where things get really messed up. Puffy Fluffy looks cute and harmless when adults are around, but the second SpongeBob leaves the room, this thing transforms into a literal monster. We're talking 4 razor-sharp tongues, massive fangs, and pure evil intent to murder Gary. The creature immediately starts terrorizing Gary, stealing his food, destroying his toys, and making death threats. But every time SpongeBob comes back, Puffy Fluffy pretends to be innocent while Gary is clearly traumatized and begging for help. Here's where SpongeBob becomes the real villain. Instead of listening to Gary or noticing the obvious signs of abuse, he gaslights his own pet. When Gary tries to show SpongeBob that Puffy Fluffy is dangerous, SpongeBob accuses Gary of being jealous and mean. He punishes Gary for being rude to his abuser. Think about how twisted this is. Gary is being stalked by a predator in his own home, and when he tries to get help from the one person who's supposed to protect him, that person sides with the predator. SpongeBob literally forces Gary to sleep in the same bed as the creature that's trying to kill him. Then Puffy Fluffy grows into this massive monster with multiple mouths and starts hunting Gary through the house. Gary has to fight for his life all night while SpongeBob sleeps peacefully upstairs, dreaming about his grandmother's cooking. Gary tries everything to survive, grabbing kitchen pans as weapons, hiding behind furniture, even putting out a fire that Puffy Fluffy starts when he destroys the library. This innocent pet snail has to become a warrior just to live through the night in his own home. When SpongeBob wakes up the next morning, his house is completely destroyed. The ceiling is cracked, the library is burned, his clothes are shredded, and everything is in ruins. Any normal person would realize something terrible happened and check if their pet is okay, but SpongeBob immediately blames Gary. He doesn't investigate, doesn't ask questions, doesn't consider that maybe the dangerous creature he was warned about might be responsible. He just assumes Gary destroyed everything out of jealousy. The final scene is the most disturbing part of the whole episode. SpongeBob walks into his exercise room to find Puffy Fluffy literally about to eat Gary alive. This monster has Gary wrapped in its tongues, ready to swallow him whole. What does SpongeBob do? He yells at Gary. He tells Gary to put Fluffy down right now and calls him a bad boy for supposedly attacking his friend. Even when confronted with undeniable evidence that this creature is trying to murder his pet, SpongeBob still refuses to believe it. Only when Puffy Fluffy starts trying to eat SpongeBob himself does he realize something might be wrong. And even then, Gary has to save him by using cowboy gear to lasso the monster and drive it away. The episode ends with SpongeBob still not understanding what happened. He asks Gary, "What do you have to say for yourself?" Like Gary did something wrong. Gary just looks at the camera with complete disappointment and defeat. What makes this episode truly horrifying is how realistic the abuse dynamics are. Puffy Fluffy represents every manipulative abuser who acts sweet around authority figures, but terrorizes their victims in private. SpongeBob represents every enabler who refuses to believe abuse is happening because the abuser seems so nice to them. Gary represents every abuse victim who tries to report what's happening, but gets blamed and punished for causing problems. The fact that Gary is a pet makes it even worse because he can't speak up for himself. He has to rely on SpongeBob to protect him, and SpongeBob completely fails. The episode teaches kids that if you're being hurt, adults might not believe you. It shows them that abusers are good at hiding their true nature. Worst of all, it suggests that victims might be blamed for their own abuse. SpongeBob's refusal to see the truth causes real harm, and next, he faces real ghosts and dark nightmares that won't let him go. Ghoul Fools from Season 8 takes supernatural horror seriously. While other SpongeBob Halloween episodes play around with spooky themes, this one actually commits to being frightening and follows through on its horror promises. The episode starts with SpongeBob and Patrick Cloud watching in jellyfish fields. Patrick makes this weird comment about the clouds calming his inner demons, which should have been our first warning that things were about to get dark. Then a literal haunted houseboat crashes near them, leaving a trail of night sky behind it. Patrick thinks it's just a fake haunted house attraction, but SpongeBob can tell something's genuinely wrong with this place. The boat itself looks like it sailed straight out of a nightmare. All rotted wood, ghostly fog, and an aura of pure evil surrounding it. Once they get inside, the horror starts immediately. There are paintings of skeletons lining the walls, and when SpongeBob looks at what seems like a normal flower painting, the flowers turn into snakes and literally jump into his pores. He runs around screaming while these things crawl under his skin before they finally return to the painting. Then, a giant, hairy hand reaches out of a closet and drags SpongeBob inside for some unseen torture. Patrick doesn't even notice because he's convinced everything is fake. SpongeBob gets spit back out completely traumatized, but Patrick still thinks it's all special effects. The real terror begins when they meet Lord Poltergeist, the ghost pirate captain. This guy is a legitimate supernatural threat with genuine malice. His crew of undead pirates performs this incredibly dark sea shanty about eating eyeballs, drinking from rusty drains, and keeping cat-o'-nine-tails as pets instead of cute snails. When they rip Gary's shell off during the song, it stops being funny real fast. They're genuinely evil spirits who enjoy causing pain and fear. Lord Poltergeist tricks SpongeBob and Patrick into thinking he's stolen their souls by putting what he claims are their spirits into glass bottles. The psychological torture of believing your soul has been taken is disturbing enough, but then he threatens to make them part of his ghostly crew forever if they don't complete his task. The middle section gets really intense when Mr. Krabs, Squidward, and Sandy show up to steal the ghost treasure. Mr. Krabs' greed completely blinds him to the supernatural danger they're all in. When Lord Poltergeist catches them stealing, he doesn't just get angry, he opens a portal to the void and sucks them into a dimension of pure horror. This is where the episode becomes genuinely terrifying. The void is a personalized nightmare realm where each character faces their worst fears. Mr. Krabs has to pay money to use a bathroom, which sounds silly, but represents his deepest terror of spending his wealth. Squidward gets trapped with a giant demonic version of SpongeBob that laughs maniacally while torturing him. For someone who already finds regular SpongeBob annoying, being stuck with an evil supernatural version for eternity is psychological torture. Patrick's nightmare is the most twisted because it shows how his stupidity actually protects him from horror. Donut that grants his wishes, but makes him suffer. Instead, Patrick's indecisiveness and lack of focus completely breaks the system. The donut demon gets so frustrated trying to torture someone too dumb to understand what's happening that it becomes the victim instead. The Flying Dutchman's appearance cranks the horror up even more. When he discovers Lord Poltergeist stole his treasure, the Dutchman transforms into a literal torpedo of supernatural rage and destroys everything in sight. The ending is genuinely dark. Everyone gets sucked into the void permanently, and the Krusty Krab becomes the Cursed Crab, staffed by demons and supernatural creatures. They're all trapped in this nightmare dimension forever, serving ghostly customers and living as prisoners of the supernatural forces they encountered. What makes this episode truly scary is how it treats its supernatural elements seriously. The ghosts are malevolent spirits who enjoy causing suffering. The magic is real and dangerous, with permanent consequences that can't be undone. The horror imagery is also surprisingly intense for a kid's show. Snakes crawling under SpongeBob's skin, souls being torn from bodies, demonic transformations, and people being dragged into supernatural torture dimensions proves that SpongeBob could do legitimate supernatural horror when it wanted to. This is genuine horror that happens to have cartoon characters. The episode respects its audience enough to deliver real scares instead of just pretending to be frightening. The scary ghosts trap everyone in a nightmare, and next SpongeBob and Patrick get so scared by a movie that they can't stop being afraid. You know that feeling when you watch a scary movie and then have to walk home in the dark? Don't Look Now from season 9 nails that experience perfectly. Most shows just make fun of people for being scared, but this episode actually gets why horror movies mess with your head. SpongeBob and Patrick decide to see Fisherman 4: Attack of the Hook at the movie theater. Despite Squidward warning them they won't sleep all night. They act tough, claiming they're grown-up big boys who can handle anything. Squidward just says boo in the most boring voice possible, and they both scream. Red flag right there, but they're determined to prove Squidward wrong, so they go see this horror movie about a killer fisherman who hooks people and turns them into fish sticks. The problem is they're too scared to actually watch it. Every time something scary happens on screen, they close their eyes or hide under their seats. They miss almost the entire movie because they keep freaking out and covering their eyes. When they finally work up the courage to watch, they realize it's midnight, the exact time when the fisherman supposedly strikes. Now they have to walk home in the dark while completely paranoid about every shadow and sound. This is where the episode gets really good. SpongeBob and Patrick become so terrified that they can't walk to their houses alone. They take turns walking each other home. But then, the person who just got walked home has to walk the other person back, creating this endless loop of fear. Every innocent thing becomes terrifying. A foghorn sounds spooky. Shadows look like the fisherman. Even Slasher McGee riding by on a tiny bike with training wheels scares them. Their fear has made the entire world feel dangerous. Squidward gets woken up by their screaming and has to physically carry them both to their houses like children. But even after they're safely inside, they keep yelling back and forth between their homes, asking if the other is okay. Squidward can't get any sleep because of their constant shouting. Here's where Squidward makes the worst decision possible. Instead of just telling them to shut up, he decides to teach them a lesson by dressing up as the fisherman and scaring them for real. He puts on a fisherman's coat, hat with fake beard, and gets a fishing rod with a hook. Squidward climbs onto his roof and uses the hook to grab Patrick through his nostril, ripping his face off as he drags him out of his rock. Patrick runs screaming to SpongeBob's house with his face literally torn apart, which traumatizes SpongeBob even more. The bedroom scene is where things get genuinely disturbing. SpongeBob and Patrick barricade the door with furniture, but Squidward climbs through the window instead. When they see this fisherman in their room, they completely lose it. In their terror, SpongeBob and Patrick do something really weird. They exchange underwear so they don't die alone. That's such a bizarre detail that it makes their fear feel more real and desperate. But then something goes horribly wrong. When Squidward starts laughing at how scared they are, SpongeBob and Patrick think the fisherman is eating Squidward alive. SpongeBob and Patrick think the fisherman is eating Squidward alive, so they attack the costume, trying to save their friend by beating up the monster. They throw Squidward out the window, and Patrick drops heavy objects on him, putting Squidward in a coma. An ambulance has to come get him. SpongeBob and Patrick think they've defeated the monster and saved Squidward's life, not realizing they nearly killed him. The final twist is perfect horror movie material. Just when everyone thinks it's over, the fisherman costume starts moving again, but this time without Squidward inside it. Even Squidward gets scared because he knows he's not controlling the costume anymore. They all scream and jump into the ambulance, only to discover that Gary was just playing in the costume. The monster was just a curious pet snail the whole time. What makes this episode work so well is how it treats fear seriously. SpongeBob and Patrick's terror feels real and relatable. Anyone who's ever watched a scary movie and then had to walk home in the dark knows exactly how they feel. The episode also shows how fear can make people do stupid things. Squidward's prank backfires spectacularly because scared people don't think clearly. SpongeBob and Patrick's rescue attempt nearly kills their friend because they were too panicked to see what was really happening. Don't Look Now succeeds as horror because it respects the emotion of being scared. Fear is shown as a powerful force that can completely change how you see the world around you. SpongeBob and Patrick's fear traps them in a cycle of panic and chaos, but next, their world turns savage when a mysterious moon transforms friends into wild, dangerous creatures. Before I tell you about Season 10's terrifying episode, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Okay, so imagine you're watching your favorite cartoon and suddenly it turns into a nature documentary from hell. That's exactly what Feral Friends does to SpongeBob, and honestly, it's the stuff of nightmares. This episode begins with Sandy's having a birthday party at Jellyfish Fields with all her friends. Everything's normal, everyone's happy, Patrick eats Sandy's cake because of course he does, but then the ground starts shaking, and this creepy green moon called Neptune's moon rises from a volcano. And that's when things go completely insane. The moment that green light touches anyone, they transform into realistic versions of their actual sea creatures. But here's the thing, when I say realistic, I mean disturbingly, uncomfortably realistic. SpongeBob becomes this weird kitchen sponge-shaped filter feeder that literally eats bacteria. Patrick turns into this gross, slimy starfish that ejects his stomach to eat. What makes this episode absolutely terrifying is how the animation completely changes. One second you're watching your familiar cartoon friends, and the next second they're these grotesque, realistic sea creatures that look like they crawled out of a biology textbook. The contrast is jarring and deeply unsettling. It's like watching your childhood friends turn into monsters. Sandy becomes the sole survivor because she's a land mammal, not a sea creature. But instead of relief, this creates pure terror. She has to watch all her friends lose their minds and personalities, becoming wild animals driven only by instinct. Mr. Krabs turns into a scavenger crab eating garbage. Mrs. Puff becomes a predatory pufferfish trying to eat Mr. Krabs. Larry molts his shell and then eats it, which is absolutely disgusting. They can't talk, they can't think, they can't remember who they are. Pearl becomes a massive sperm whale who swallows her phone. Squidward transforms into a giant octopus that becomes the main threat of the episode. Speaking of Squidward, his transformation is the most terrifying part. This giant octopus version of him stalks Sandy like a horror movie monster. He uses his beak to cut through her supposedly indestructible tree dome, flooding it and hunting down his former friends to eat them. The way he methodically breaks through the glass and pursues Sandy and the others feels like something out of Jaws. Sandy desperately tries to protect her transformed friends by keeping them in an aquarium, but they're still acting on pure animal instinct. Mrs. Puff keeps trying to eat Mr. Krabs. SpongeBob is filter feeding bacteria that literally scream as they get consumed. It's like babysitting a group of dangerous wild animals that used to be your best friends. The episode doesn't shy away from the predator-prey relationships either. The French narrator explains how these creatures would naturally behave, and it's brutal. Octopuses eat fish. Whales eat smaller sea life. Crabs scavenge for garbage. The show temporarily abandons its usual friendship themes and embraces the harsh reality of ocean survival. What's really disturbing is how helpless Sandy becomes. She's always been the smart, capable one who solves problems with science and karate, but here she's completely out of her element, literally running for her life from her own friends. When Squidward grabs her with his tentacles and tries to eat her, the terror feels real. The climax where Sandy has to summon Pearl to fight Squidward is insane. Two massive sea creatures battling while Sandy tries to keep her smaller friends safe. It's like watching King Kong fight Godzilla, except these monsters used to be your cartoon buddies sharing birthday cake. Even when everyone transforms back to normal after 2 hours, there's an unsettling aftermath. Everyone's clothes have dissolved, so they're all naked and embarrassed. It's a weird detail that adds to the discomfort. The experience has left them vulnerable and changed, but the episode isn't done traumatizing traumatizing viewers. Just when you think it's over, Neptune's sun appears and transforms Sandy into a realistic land squirrel. The cycle continues, proving that no one is truly safe from these cosmic forces. The genius of Feral Friends is how it takes the familiar SpongeBob formula and twists it into something genuinely frightening. The show has always played with the idea that these are sea creatures, but usually in a cute, sanitized way. This episode forces viewers to confront the reality of what these characters actually are: wild animals with natural instincts to hunt, eat, and survive. For kids who grew up seeing SpongeBob and Patrick as harmless cartoon friends, watching them become realistic predators is genuinely traumatic. The episode proves that SpongeBob can do horror when it wants to, and it's absolutely terrifying. Sometimes the scariest thing is seeing something familiar become completely alien and dangerous. After everyone turns into wild animals, Season 11 gets even darker when SpongeBob and Patrick start terrifying Squidward in a way no one saw coming. Okay, let's talk about the episode from Season 11 that made grown adults question what they were watching. Ink Lemonade is hands down one of the most disturbing things SpongeBob has ever put on air, and honestly, I'm surprised it even made it past the censors. Patrick's running a lemonade stand, but he's literally just selling water because he doesn't understand how lemonade works. Classic Patrick, right? Squidward gives him a rotten lemon out of spite, and everything seems normal for about 30 seconds. Then SpongeBob sneaks up behind Squidward with a megaphone and screams. Squidward gets so startled that ink shoots out of his nose into Patrick's pitcher. When SpongeBob drinks it, he discovers it's absolutely delicious. And that's where this episode takes a hard left turn. Patrick realizes he needs more ink, so he decides the best strategy is to completely traumatize Squidward. And when I say traumatize, I mean it literally. The first thing Patrick does is knock on Squidward's door and rip his own skin off. Not metaphorically, he actually tears his flesh apart to reveal his internal organs. His jaw, trachea, heart, lungs, and intestines are all hanging out for everyone to see. Let me repeat that. A children's cartoon showed a character performing self-mutilation to expose his internal anatomy. The fact that this aired on Nickelodeon is absolutely wild. Patrick's intestines even talk to Squidward, asking for squid squeezings like this is totally normal behavior. But wait, it gets worse. Patrick's next brilliant idea is to bring a giant red sea spider into Squidward's house. It crawls around Squidward's living room while he's trying to listen to music, and Squidward has to climb the walls and hide on his kitchen cabinets like he's in a horror movie. The spider scene is so intense that Squidward becomes genuinely paranoid. He starts hearing sounds everywhere, hiding under rugs and jumping at every little noise. The poor guy develops what looks like legitimate PTSD from this whole experience. Then Patrick decides one traumatic event isn't enough and creates an entire haunted house setup outside Squidward's door. We're talking full horror movie production here. Creepy music, jump scares, the works. There's a scene where Squidward ends up in a spooky nursery with disturbing lullaby music playing in the background. Patrick even dresses up as a creepy baby and calls Squidward Dada in the most unsettling way possible. The haunted house sequence feels like something out of a psychological thriller. Squidward gets transported to a fake Krusty Krab that's supposed to be 60 years in the future, complete with a puppet version of his elderly self. The whole thing is designed to mess with his head, and it works perfectly. What makes this episode so upsetting is how Patrick keeps messing with Squidward non-stop. He keeps doing it again and again, slowly breaking him down just to make money. The voice actor Roger Bumpus said this was the hardest episode he'd ever worked on because he had to repeatedly scream, spray ink sounds, and run away in terror. That's a professional voice actor saying a SpongeBob episode was too intense for him to handle easily. And just when you think the episode might end on a lighter note, it doesn't. SpongeBob and Patrick move on to selling cookies, which seems harmless until they reveal the cookies are made with spider eggs. The giant spider returns and baby spiders start crawling out of Squidward's mouth while he screams and sprays ink all over the screen. The episode literally ends with Squidward's mouth full of spider babies. What's really unsettling is how casually SpongeBob and Patrick treat the whole situation. They're completely oblivious to the fact that they're psychologically destroying their neighbor. That somehow makes it even more disturbing than if they were doing it on purpose. After Patrick and SpongeBob's cruel tricks broke Squidward's mind, Season 12 got even darker with Plankton becoming a scary ghost and a shocking ending that scared the audience. Let's talk about the SpongeBob episode from Season 12 that seriously felt like a full-on horror movie. The ghost of Plankton is downright terrifying. It's one of the creepiest things the show has ever done. The whole thing starts with Plankton watching a horror movie where a grandmother ghost is chasing some poor woman through a haunted house. The woman tries to hide, but the ghost just floats right through the door and completely engulfs her while she's screaming. That's already pretty intense for SpongeBob standards, but this episode is just getting started. Plankton gets inspired and decides he wants to become a ghost so he can steal the Krabby Patty formula. formula. He builds this nightmare machine called a ghost extractor that literally looks like a skull. The thing grabs him with robot arms and squeezes his soul out of his body like he's a tube of toothpaste. Watching Plankton's spirit separate from his physical form is genuinely disturbing. His lifeless body just sits there while his ghost floats away. But here's where things get really scary. When Plankton tries to grab the secret formula, he can't pick anything up because he's a ghost. That's when the Flying Dutchman shows up, and this guy is absolutely terrifying in this episode. He starts teaching Plankton how to be a proper ghost, and every lesson is basically a masterclass in horror. The shape-shifting lesson is nightmare fuel. The Flying Dutchman transforms into different monsters: a horrifying creature with multiple eyes, a giant walrus, a rattlesnake, and then pearl crabs. But when he turns into Pearl, Plankton screams in absolute terror because he's afraid of whales. The whole sequence is designed to be as scary as possible. Then comes the scaring lesson, and this is where the episode goes completely off the rails. The Flying Dutchman demonstrates proper scaring technique on some random robber. He roars so loudly and makes such a terrifying face that the guy literally falls apart. We're talking about his clothes, skin, muscles, and skeleton just separating from his body, leaving only his brain, eyes, and nervous system floating around. That's not cartoon violence, that's body horror. When Plankton tries to scare someone, he accidentally looks in a mirror and scares himself so badly that his own ghost skin splits apart, revealing his ghost skeleton underneath. The image of Plankton's ghostly remains floating around is genuinely disturbing. The haunting lesson takes place at Squidward's house, and this sequence feels like something out of a legitimate horror movie. Plankton possesses Squidward's bed and turns it into this green, ectoplasm-dripping monster with a giant mouth. Squidward wakes up covered in ghost slime while evil laughter echoes through his room. The poor guy is so terrified that his skin turns completely white. What makes this scene even scarier is how realistic Squidward's fear feels. He's not just startled, he's genuinely traumatized. He hides in his dresser with his clarinet trying to comfort himself with music, but his clarinet playing is so awful that it drives the ghost crazy. When Plankton grabs the clarinet away from him, he transforms into a ghostly version of SpongeBob, which sends Squidward into complete panic mode. The whole episode has this dark, supernatural atmosphere that's completely different from normal SpongeBob episodes. The backgrounds are darker, the music is creepier, and everyone's reactions feel more intense than usual. It's like watching a horror movie that happens to star cartoon characters. But the absolute worst part comes at the end. After all the ghost chaos, Plankton returns to the chum bucket to find everyone attending his funeral because they think he's dead. His actual body is lying in a tiny coffin while SpongeBob cries hysterically. The whole scene is morbid and unsettling. Then the Flying Dutchman decides to possess Plankton's body and pretend to be alive again. When everyone realizes they've been tricked, they form an angry mob and start stomping on what they think is Plankton. Watching a crowd of people violently attack someone is pretty intense, even if it's the Flying Dutchman inside. The episode ends with everyone continuing to stomp on the real Plankton after he gets his body back. But then comes the moment that traumatized an entire generation of kids. After the end card appears, the Flying Dutchman suddenly pops up from the bottom of the screen, turns his head like an owl, and lets out this bone-chilling scream directly at the audience. That jump scare breaks the fourth wall completely. The Flying Dutchman isn't scaring someone in the show, he's scaring you, the person watching. Kids weren't expecting it, and it caught everyone completely off guard. The fact that it happens after the episode officially ends makes it even more shocking. Plankton's ghost story got really scary, and now season 13 gets even weirder with Slappy Days, full of creepy body horror and strange stuff treated like it's normal. Imagine this. You wake up in the morning and have to choose which head to put on your body from a collection of severed heads sitting on your nightstand. That's literally how Slappy Days opens, and it only gets more disturbing from there. This episode is absolutely terrifying, and honestly, it feels more like a horror short film than a SpongeBob episode. The whole thing starts in Nosferatu's castle, which already sets a creepy tone, but what happens next is genuinely disturbing. We see Slappy's headless body walking around in pajamas, and then it approaches 4 identical severed heads just sitting there like trophies. The heads are all begging, pick me, while this headless creature decides which one to attach for the day. Think about how messed up that concept is. This guy has multiple spare heads and he just picks one each morning like he's choosing a hat. The other heads sigh in disappointment when they're not chosen, which means they're all conscious and aware of being rejected. That's psychological horror disguised as cartoon comedy. Then comes Slappy's morning routine, which is absolutely grotesque. He goes to take a shower, but instead gets wrapped up in spider webs by a giant sea spider named Esmeralda. The spider sprays him with its silk, and during this process, his flesh melts away until he's just a skull. He treats this like it's totally normal, chatting casually with the spider while his face dissolves. The casual nature of the body horror is what makes it so disturbing. Slappy doesn't react with pain or fear when his head becomes a skeleton. He acts like this is just part of his daily hygiene routine. That kind of normalization of grotesque imagery is genuinely unsettling. When Slappy serves breakfast to Nosferatu, we discover the vampire has a cold that makes him randomly transform between human and bat form every time he sneezes. Watching this uncontrolled shape-shifting is pretty disturbing, especially when Slappy has to cage him like an animal to take him to the doctor. The doctor's office scene introduces even more horror elements. Dr. Calamari has a monster assistant holding a steaming iron, and the whole place feels like a medical torture chamber. When Nosferatu hypnotizes the doctor into bringing him blood samples, it shows how easily these supernatural creatures can control normal people's minds. But the scariest part happens when Slappy goes to kill time in Bikini Bottom. At the arcade, he starts dancing and his entire body falls apart. His arms and legs detach and start kicking other kids while his head flies across the room into a basketball hoop. The kids cheer like this is normal entertainment, but watching someone's limbs separate and act independently is pure body horror. The carnival scene gets even weirder. When Slappy tries to play a water gun game, he loses control and accidentally shoots water into the barker's mouth. The barker's head fills up with water until it literally explodes, soaking everyone nearby. A man's head exploding should be traumatic, but everyone treats it like a fun carnival trick. At the pet store, Slappy has a romantic encounter with his girlfriend Slippy. Their idea of flirting involves calling each other disgusting, horrifying, gruesome, and stink lips. Their twisted relationship shows how these creatures have completely different standards of what's attractive or romantic. When they almost kiss, it's genuinely uncomfortable to watch. The cemetery picnic scene is classic horror imagery. Slappy sits among graves talking to dead people like they're old friends. When he asks Mr. Ribeye for the time, a skeleton hand emerges from the ground wearing a watch. The fact that Slappy has casual conversations with corpses shows how disconnected he is from normal life and death. When Slappy returns to the doctor's office, everyone has been hypnotized by Nosferatu. All the patients are sitting there chanting Nosferatu over and over like they're in a cult. The doctor snaps out of it just long enough to give medical advice before going back to his trance-like state. The ending is completely insane. Nosferatu puts on a flea collar, and hundreds of fleas fly out of his body. Slappy catches them and puts them on a sandwich, planning to eat them later. The casual way he treats parasites as food is absolutely disgusting. But the absolute worst moment comes at the very end. As Nosferatu and Slappy fly home together, the moon suddenly grows a mouth and swallows them both. The moon is a living creature that eats people. That final image of the moon's giant mouth consuming the characters is genuinely terrifying. What makes Slappy Days so disturbing is how it normalizes horror. Body parts falling off, heads exploding, people being hypnotized, creatures eating parasites. All of this is treated like everyday life. The episode creates a world where the most grotesque and horrifying things are completely normal, which is more unsettling than traditional scares. This episode proves that SpongeBob can be genuinely frightening when it embraces horror themes. The body horror, supernatural elements, and complete normalization of disturbing imagery make this one of the most unsettling episodes in the entire series. Slappy Days shows how SpongeBob can be creepy in small ways, but Creepaway Camp goes all in with real scary horror and violence like you've never seen before. There's something genuinely disturbing about taking beloved childhood characters and throwing them into a full-blown horror movie, and that's exactly what Creepaway Camp does. This 44-minute Halloween special is basically SpongeBob meets Friday the 13th, and it's way more terrifying than it has any right to be. The episode opens with classic horror movie vibes. A mysterious, muscular figure in the shadows writing threatening letters to all the former Camp Coral campers. Right from the start, you know this isn't going to be your typical SpongeBob adventure. The atmosphere is dark, creepy, and filled with ominous sounds that would make most kids want to hide behind the couch. When everyone arrives at Camp Coral for what they think is a reunion, they find the place completely destroyed and falling apart. This has become a horror movie set. The broken buildings, collapsed signs, and general decay create this really unsettling atmosphere that feels nothing like the usual bright and colorful SpongeBob world. But here's where things get really scary. People start disappearing one by one, and not in a funny cartoon way. The mysterious figure systematically hunts down each character using genuine horror movie tactics. We're talking about characters getting snatched from behind, pulled into bushes, dragged underwater, and yanked through walls. The episode follows classic slasher film rules perfectly. Harvey even explains the actual rules of surviving horror movies to the remaining characters. Don't go off alone, don't say, "I'll be right back," and no romantic stuff. The fact that a SpongeBob character is literally giving survival tips from real horror films shows how seriously this episode takes its scary premise. What makes this episode particularly disturbing is how it builds tension. Unlike most SpongeBob episodes where everything is resolved quickly with humor, Creepaway Camp lets the fear simmer. Characters spend long stretches genuinely terrified, thinking their friends are dead. There's real psychological psychological horror happening here. The disappearances themselves are genuinely creepy. Lady Upturn gets pulled through a clock, the anchovies vanish from an outhouse, Bubble Bass gets attacked in the shower in a scene that directly references Psycho, and Kevin gets his tentacles ripped off before being dragged underwater. These aren't silly cartoon mishaps, they're actual horror movie sequences. One of the most unsettling aspects is how the episode plays with audience expectations. You keep waiting for the typical SpongeBob humor to kick in and make everything okay, but it doesn't happen. The characters remain genuinely scared throughout most of the episode. Even when they try to make jokes, the horror atmosphere overpowers everything else. The visual design is also genuinely frightening. The mysterious figure is built like a horror movie monster, muscular, shadowy, and threatening. The decaying camp looks like something from a post-apocalyptic nightmare. Even familiar characters look more menacing in this darker setting. When characters get killed, they disappear completely for long stretches of the episode. This isn't like typical cartoon violence where someone gets flattened and immediately pops back up. People vanish and stay gone, making viewers genuinely worry about their fate. The episode commits to its horror premise in a way that's actually unsettling. The Bubble Bass shower scene is particularly disturbing. He's scrubbing himself while the figure approaches from behind, and the whole sequence is shot like a classic horror movie murder scene. The camera angles, the music, and the pacing all scream, someone's about to die, in a way that feels completely wrong for a kid's show. Even when the truth is revealed, that Elwood has been kidnapping everyone because he was left behind at camp and just wanted his friends back, the episode doesn't completely abandon its horror atmosphere. Elwood himself is presented as this muscular, intimidating figure who's been living alone in the woods for years. That's genuinely disturbing backstory for a children's cartoon. The scariest part might be how the episode normalizes horror movie logic. Characters discuss murder, death, and survival tactics like it's completely normal. The fact that this is happening in the usually innocent SpongeBob universe makes it feel even more wrong and unsettling. What really sets this episode apart is its commitment to genuine scares over comedy. Most SpongeBob Halloween episodes mix spooky elements with humor, but Creepaway Camp plays its horror completely straight for most of its runtime. The jokes that do exist feel nervous and uncomfortable rather than genuinely funny. The episode also benefits from being 44 minutes long, which gives it time to build real atmospheric dread. Shorter episodes would have to rush to the resolution, but this special lets the fear marinate. Characters spend genuine time being scared, which makes viewers feel scared too. Creepaway Camp shows horror and death in SpongeBob's world, and then unidentified flailing octopus makes it even scarier with creepy aliens and body horror. Imagine waking up one morning and your eyes suddenly grow mouths, start screaming, then rip themselves out of your head and run away to hide in your toilet. That's literally what happens to Squidward in this episode, and it's absolutely terrifying. Unidentified flailing octopus from season 15 starts innocently enough with SpongeBob and Patrick watching a news report about UFO sightings. They put on tinfoil hats and start hunting for aliens in Squidward's garden, completely destroying his flowers in the process. Classic SpongeBob setup, right? You think you know where this is going. Squidward gets so annoyed that he decides to teach them a lesson by creating a fake UFO using a fishing pole and some weird alien mask. He successfully convinces SpongeBob and Patrick that aliens don't exist, and they go off to play superheroes instead. Squidward feels proud of himself for being the voice of reason. But here's where the episode takes a hard turn into genuine horror territory. The moment Squidward goes back inside, actual aliens show up. These aren't cute cartoon aliens either. They're these creepy tiki-headed creatures who want to steal Squidward's house as some kind of artifact for their collection. The aliens see Squidward as a parasite that needs to be eliminated, so they break into his house while he's sleeping and start spraying him with this green chemical. When Squidward wakes up, his eyes literally transform into screaming mouths. Not metaphorically. His actual eyeballs grow teeth and start shrieking in terror before popping out of his head and scurrying away like terrified animals. This body horror sequence is genuinely disturbing. Watching Squidward's eyes become independent creatures that flee from him in fear is nightmare fuel. The fact that they hide in his toilet like they're seeking shelter from their own body is deeply unsettling. What makes it even scarier is how Squidward handles the situation. He calmly opens his dresser drawer and puts on a spare pair of eyes like this is totally normal. The casual way he deals with his body parts becoming sentient and running away suggests this kind of thing happens regularly in his world, which is somehow more disturbing than if he had panicked. The aliens themselves are genuinely threatening. They're not the typical goofy SpongeBob villains. They're cold, calculating, and completely indifferent to Squidward's suffering. When they attack him with spray cans and drilling equipment, there's real menace behind their actions. They view him as nothing more than a pest to be exterminated. When Squidward tries to fight back, he realizes SpongeBob and Patrick are in SpongeBob's house playing dress-up, which means the aliens attacking him are real. The moment of recognition when he understands that everything he just dismissed as impossible is actually happening creates this perfect horror movie beat. His worldview completely collapses in real time. The aliens then beam up his entire house with him clinging to it, dragging him him into their mothership. The space sequences are genuinely creepy, with sterile alien environments and weird experimental chambers. When Squidward tries to escape into space, he starts suffocating and has to crawl back inside, showing how truly trapped he is. The probing scene subverts expectations in the most psychologically disturbing way possible. Instead of the typical physical examination you'd expect from alien abduction stories, they force Squidward to talk about his childhood trauma and relationship with his mother. This psychological torture is somehow more invasive and uncomfortable than any physical probe would have been. The aliens get so annoyed by Squidward's endless stories about his mother that they literally dump him back on Earth just to get rid of him. The idea that someone could be so psychologically exhausting that even alien scientists give up on studying them is both funny and deeply sad. But the most horrifying part comes at the end. When Squidward tries to tell SpongeBob and Patrick what happened, they refuse to believe him because of what he told them earlier about aliens not existing. Patrick literally shuts him up by closing him inside his own mailbox. Squidward is trapped with the knowledge that aliens are real, but nobody will ever believe him because of his own skepticism. This ending is pure psychological horror. Squidward now knows the truth about alien life, but he's completely powerless to convince anyone else. He's stuck with this terrifying knowledge while everyone around him thinks he's either lying or crazy. That kind of isolation and helplessness is genuinely frightening. The episode also features some seriously disturbing imagery throughout. The alien breeding chambers with eggs hatching baby aliens, Squidward floating helplessly in space, and the clinical coldness of the alien experiments all contribute to an atmosphere of genuine dread. What makes this episode so effective is how it starts as a typical SpongeBob story about silly misunderstandings, then gradually transforms into legitimate science fiction horror. The body horror elements, psychological torture, and cosmic indifference create something that feels completely wrong for a kids show. If you're enjoying the video so far, be sure to subscribe to our channel, and now let's break down the creepiest episodes.
One Course Meal is straight up the most screwed up SpongeBob episode ever made, where Mr. Krabs actually becomes a psychopath who tortures Plankton using his worst fear. The episode starts off like any other SpongeBob episode, with Plankton doing his usual thing, trying to steal the Krabby Patty formula with explosives and robot arms. He's got Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob tied up in the Krusty Krab, going through his typical villain routine with tickle torture and dramatic demands for the secret recipe. Everything seems like just another goofy cartoon adventure until Pearl walks in for what should be a simple father-daughter moment. But the second Plankton sees her, he completely loses his mind, screaming, panicking, and running away like he's staring death in the face. That's when Mr. Krabs realizes his business rival has a serious whale phobia, and instead of just being relieved that his daughter accidentally saved the day, this sick freak gets an idea. You can literally see the twisted gears turning in his head as he decides he's going to use Plankton's biggest fear as his personal weapon. What started as just another cartoon scheme where the bad guy gets foiled suddenly transforms into something way more sinister. Mr. Krabs isn't satisfied just winning the round. He wants to completely destroy Plankton using psychological warfare. The whole dynamic shifts from typical cartoon rivalry into something that resembles real-world bullying and abuse, and somehow the writers thought this would make perfect entertainment for children. This is where the episode goes from bad to way worse. Mr. Krabs finds out about Plankton's whale phobia and decides to become a full-time stalker. He steals one of Pearl's dresses and starts dressing up like a whale to hunt down Plankton wherever he goes. And here's the really messed up part. Plankton isn't just randomly scared of whales for no reason. His fear comes from his family getting eaten by whales, so Mr. Krabs is literally using someone's family trauma as his personal torture device. What makes this whole thing even sicker is how Mr. Krabs doesn't just scare Plankton once and call it even. No, this madman makes it his full-time job to terrorize Plankton for weeks on end, showing up everywhere like some deranged serial killer. Plankton starts falling apart completely. He can't sleep, can't work, can't even feel safe in his own restaurant because Mr. Krabs keeps breaking in to mess with him. The guy becomes a paranoid wreck who's constantly looking over his shoulder, waiting for the next attack. Even worse, his computer wife Karen thinks he's going crazy and won't believe him about the whale attacks. So now he's totally alone and isolated while slowly having a complete mental breakdown. Mr. Krabs has basically turned Plankton's entire life into a nightmare, and the show treats this like it's the funniest thing ever. After 16 days of this torture, Plankton completely snaps and turns into a total wreck. The episode shows him sitting in his chair looking like a crazy person. Long gray hair, wild beard, tissue boxes for shoes, too scared to even go outside. Then they show us his nightmare where a demonic version of Pearl eats him alive and he meets his dead whale-eaten ancestors in her stomach, which is just pure nightmare fuel that has no business being in a kid's show. But here's where this episode becomes absolutely unforgivable. Plankton gets so broken down that he literally tries to die. He lies down in the middle of the road waiting for a bus to run him over, begging SpongeBob to step on him as hard as possible to end his misery. And the show treats this like it's just another funny cartoon gag instead of the horrific result of weeks of psychological torture. Meanwhile, Mr. Krabs is still running around in his whale costume, either too stupid or too evil to realize that his harmless prank has driven someone to want to die. The whole thing shows how completely powerless Plankton has become. He went from being a villain to being a broken victim who's literally begging for death just to escape what Mr. Krabs is doing to him. It's sick, twisted, and has no place in children's television. The episode completely screwed up what SpongeBob was supposed to be about and showed kids that psychological torture and death are just funny cartoon jokes. This episode basically told children that it's totally fine to systematically destroy someone's mental health as long as you call it a prank, and that driving someone to wanting to die is hilarious entertainment. The message is absolutely disgusting.
That torturing people is just normal rivalry, that making someone want to die is comedy gold, and that the solution to abuse is just more abuse. And the episode doesn't even try to fix anything. Plankton's still terrified of whales, his brain is still completely fried, and now the show just moves on to Mr. Krabs getting terrorized by mimes like it's all just one big joke. This moment marked the point when SpongeBob started to change. It went from being a fun, wholesome kid show to something darker and more focused on shocking people, instead of just being good, lighthearted entertainment for children. The way this episode treats mental health problems like their punchline shows just how badly children's TV can fail when writers care more about being edgy than being responsible. Even years later, this episode is still proof of how animated shows can completely cross the line and then hide behind "it's just a cartoon" when people call them out for being wrong. After turning psychological torment into a punchline, the show took a darker turn by making body horror feel like a bedtime story. I Was a Teenage Gary is another seriously disturbing SpongeBob episode that shows SpongeBob slowly transforming into a grotesque snail creature in scenes that feel more like a horror movie than a kid's cartoon. The episode starts with something totally normal that every kid knows about: asking someone to watch your pet while you're gone for the weekend. SpongeBob needs to go to some jellyfishing convention and asks his grumpy neighbor Squidward to take care of Gary the snail. Should have been easy enough. Just basic pet sitting that happens all the time. But Squidward only agrees because he wants SpongeBob out of his hair for the weekend, and he has zero intention of actually doing what he promised. Right from the start, you've got this setup where Squidward's being a total jerk and planning to neglect Gary. But it seems like just another typical Squidward being selfish episode. The whole thing feels so ordinary and relatable. Pet care instructions, weekend plans, neighbor stuff that kids see all the time. That's what makes what happens next so screwed up, because the episode takes the completely normal situation that any kid could find themselves in and turns it into pure nightmare fuel. The disturbing stuff starts when Squidward completely abandons Gary for 3 straight days, while SpongeBob's having fun at his convention. Gary slowly starts dying from starvation and neglect, and the episode shows every painful detail of this poor snail wasting away until he's basically a skeleton. He gets so weak he can barely move, looking like an actual dying animal instead of a cartoon pet, which is way too heavy for a kid's show. Squidward freaks out when he realizes Gary's about to die on his watch and starts panicking, trying to shove food down the snail's throat and even eating Gary's food himself to hide evidence like some kind of maniac. Then, this sketchy veterinarian shows up with some snail plasma injection, which sounds more like a mad scientist experiment than real medicine. But of course, SpongeBob accidentally gets injected with this mysterious snail plasma instead of Gary, and that's when the episode goes from being about pet neglect to turning into a full-blown body horror nightmare. The transformation scene is hands down one of the most screwed up and graphic things SpongeBob has ever shown, throwing out any pretense of being safe cartoon content and going straight into pure nightmare territory. What starts with SpongeBob just feeling kind of funny quickly turns into a disgusting metamorphosis that they show in way too much detail for a kid's show. His eyes are the first thing to go completely wrong, bulging out of his head in a way that looks more like a medical horror movie than a cartoon. These gross snail eyes on stalks pop out while SpongeBob keeps trying to tell himself everything's fine, even though his own body is betraying him. Then, his arms and legs start disappearing into his body, which looks more like watching someone get their limbs amputated than any kind of cartoon magic. The worst part is when his final desperate scream of "something is wrong with me" turns into an animal noise, showing that SpongeBob as we know him is basically dead and gone, replaced by this snail monster. The reaction to SpongeBob's transformation shows just how committed this episode is to being straight up horror instead of treating it like some silly cartoon joke. Squidward takes one look at the SpongeBob snail monster and is genuinely terrified
terrified, running away screaming like he's seen something that shouldn't exist. There's no comedy in the chase scene that follows. It's just Squidward running for his life from the thing that used to be his neighbor. The really messed up part is that you can tell SpongeBob's still trapped inside that disgusting snail body, trying to get help but unable to communicate that he's still human on the inside. When Squidward accidentally injects himself with the snail plasma, it doesn't feel like he's getting what he deserves. It feels like watching some kind of horrible virus spread from person to person. This episode screwed up way more than just one night of TV. It basically opened the floodgates for putting genuinely disturbing horror content into kids' show and calling it entertainment. I Was a Teenage Gary proved that cartoons could traumatize children as long as they slapped a cartoon label on it, completely ignoring any sense of what's appropriate for family television. For a whole generation of kids who grew up watching this, the transformation scene was their first taste of real horror, and they had no idea it was coming, because they thought they were just watching SpongeBob. Tons of adults still talk about how this episode messed them up as kids, giving them lasting phobias about needles, medical stuff, or just the idea of their body changing in horrible ways. The worst part is how the episode just ends with everyone accepting that they're snail monsters now. Like it's totally fine and normal. No attempt to fix it, no lesson learned, just, hey kids, sometimes horrible things happen to your body and you should just deal with it. After turning a simple case of neglect into a full-blown body horror nightmare, the show doubles down by transforming a harmless ghost story into a terrifying descent into psychological dread. Before I tell you about that though, make sure to subscribe. Graveyard Shift is a masterclass in scaring the crap out of kids by having Squidward tell his fake ghost story about the hash-slinging slasher that hits every childhood fear perfectly. The episode starts with Mr. Krabs being his usual greedy self, deciding to keep the Krusty Krab open all night just to make more money, forcing SpongeBob and Squidward to work a shift they never signed up for. The whole restaurant turns creepy once it gets dark. What used to be a busy, cheerful place during the day becomes this isolated, dimly lit nightmare that feels completely different from normal. SpongeBob starts out excited about working the night shift, but that changes real quick when he has to do simple stuff like taking out the trash in the dark outside. That fear of the dark that every kid has becomes the perfect weapon for Squidward to mess with SpongeBob's head. The empty restaurant with no customers and nothing happening makes every little noise sound 10 times louder and scarier than it should. And of course, Mr. Krabs dumps this whole 24-hour policy on them and then disappears, leaving SpongeBob and Squidward to deal with the consequences while he's probably at home counting his money. It's a perfect setup for psychological torture disguised as just another workday. The real sick stuff starts when Squidward sees how scared SpongeBob is of the dark and decides to completely mess with his head by making up this twisted ghost story. He creates this hash-slinging slasher legend that hits every fear button at once: gruesome workplace deaths, revenge ghosts, and the idea that nowhere is safe from danger. Squidward doesn't hold back on the graphic details either, talking about severed hands, rusty spatulas replacing body parts, and fatal bus accidents like he's trying to traumatize SpongeBob for life. He makes the story sound so real and specific that SpongeBob actually believes it could be true, especially when Squidward starts improvising details like how it only happens on Tuesday nights after SpongeBob mentions what day it is. The 3 warning signs, lights flickering, creepy phone calls, and a ghost bus, turn every normal thing that happens in the restaurant into a sign that death is coming. You can tell Squidward is enjoying watching SpongeBob fall apart with fear, which shows how easily harmless pranks can turn into straight-up psychological torture. The empty restaurant makes every little sound and shadow seem terrifying, turning their workplace into a horror movie where SpongeBob thinks he's about to die. Then, the episode gets really messed up when Squidward's fake ghost story starts actually happening in real life, turning his psychological torture into genuine supernatural horror. The lights start flickering exactly like he said they would. Then comes the creepy silent phone call, and suddenly all these coincidences are making the impossible seem totally real. Squidward tries to brush it off as just electrical problems, but you can see him starting to freak out when he can't explain what's going on. When the ghost bus shows up exactly like his made-up story, that's when fiction becomes a reality, and both of them realize they might actually be screwed. The hash-slinging slasher looks exactly like Squidward described, his dark shadow figure with glowing red eyes holding a spatula, which is terrifying because it means every detail of his fake story was somehow true. The episode completely messes with your head because you don't know if this is real supernatural stuff or just really weird timing, and both Squidward and SpongeBob are losing their minds trying to figure it out. The scariest part is when they both think they're about to die and start confessing their deepest secrets to one another, believing these are their final moments alive. The ending completely flips everything on its head in the best way possible. The hash-slinging slasher is just some nervous guy trying to apply for a job, and all the supernatural stuff was just really bad timing and coincidence. This poor dude was so anxious about asking for work that he kept calling and hanging up, which explains the creepy phone calls that had everyone convinced a ghost was coming to kill them. It's actually kind of sad when you realize this monster was just a socially awkward person who couldn't work up the nerve to talk, turning him from a terrifying threat into someone you actually feel bad for. But the episode doesn't let you get too comfortable with this logical explanation, because Squidward points out that nobody explained why the lights were flickering in the first place. Then, they reveal that Nosferatu, the classic vampire, was messing with the light switch the whole time, which is completely random and weird, but somehow works perfectly. This ending is genius because it tells you that while this specific scare was fake, there really are supernatural freaks running around their world, doing bizarre stuff for no reason. So maybe being paranoid isn't such a bad idea after all. This episode basically set the blueprint for how to scare the heck out of kids without getting the show canceled or traumatizing them permanently. Graveyard Shift proved that cartoons could genuinely terrify kids as long as they didn't completely go over the line into nightmare-fueled territory, which opened the door for tons of other shows to start adding horror elements into kids' programming. The hash-slinging slasher became this legendary cartoon villain that everyone remembers and references, showing other creators exactly how to do kid-friendly horror without screwing it up completely. For a whole generation of viewers, this was their first real taste of horror storytelling, which means SpongeBob basically became their horror gateway drug before they moved on to actual scary stories and movies. The tricks this episode used, building up suspense through stories, making coincidences seem supernatural, and then pulling the rug out from under you, became standard horror writing techniques that creators still rip off today across all kinds of shows and movies. Even now, Graveyard Shift is still the gold standard for how to create genuine fear and tension while keeping things safe enough for kids, proving that the scariest stuff comes from messing with people's head and letting their imagination do most of the work instead of just showing gross or violent imagery. After turning a harmless prank into a full-blown psychological breakdown, the show pushed further by turning a minor hygiene slip into a full-scale biological apocalypse. Fungus Among Us is basically SpongeBob's version of a zombie apocalypse, where some nasty sea fungus spreads through Bikini Bottom and turns everyone into disgusting, infected freaks. The episode starts off totally normally, with SpongeBob just trying to feed Gary some healthy snail food, but Gary decides to be a picky eater and goes for some gross fungus growing on SpongeBob's dirty floor instead. Right away, you can see how this is going to be about how bad hygiene and eating nasty stuff will come back to bite you. SpongeBob can't even clean his house properly, leaving fungus all over the place, which creates the perfect setup for some kind of disease outbreak. Everything seems like just another regular day. SpongeBob sleeping, taking care of his pet, getting ready for work, which makes it even more disturbing when things go wrong, because it shows how quickly normal life can turn into a nightmare. When Patrick shows up and immediately notices the fungus growing on SpongeBob's head, it proves how obvious the infection is to everyone except the person who has it. But Patrick being Patrick gives terrible advice that just makes everything worse. SpongeBob's pineapple house, which is supposed to be a safe space where nothing bad happens, becomes the starting point for a biological disaster that's going to spread to everyone in town. The real nightmare starts when Patrick gives SpongeBob the worst possible advice: scratch it like there's no tomorrow, which makes the fungus spread all over SpongeBob's body right in front of your eyes. You literally watch the infection get bigger and more disgusting every time he scratches, showing kids exactly how bad decisions can turn a small problem into a total disaster. Then, SpongeBob goes to work at the Krusty Krab while he's infected, which is absolutely revolting because he's literally shedding contagious fungus all over food and cooking surfaces. The guy's preparing meals for customers while pieces of his infection are falling into their burgers, which is every food safety nightmare rolled into one gross scenario. SpongeBob tries to hide how sick he is by shoving the fungus back up his nose, which shows how infected people will lie and cover up their condition instead of staying home, making the whole outbreak way worse for everyone. When the SWAT team show up in full hazmat suits, the episode stops being funny and turns into a straight-up pandemic horror show with government agents treating SpongeBob like he's carrying some kind of biological weapon. The pandemic hits its worst point when the fungus takes over the entire Krusty Krab, turning it into a contaminated hellscape where everyone looks like green, moldy zombies. Every character you know and love becomes this disgusting, fungus-covered freak that's barely recognizable as their former selves, which is pure nightmare fuel for kids watching their favorite cartoon characters get destroyed. Squidward accidentally contaminates all the food without knowing it, so customers are eating infected burgers and getting turned into carriers, which is every parent's worst fear about restaurant hygiene rolled into one horrifying scenario.
Then all the infected people form an angry mob and go after SpongeBob like he's some kind of monster, showing how quickly people turn on each other and start pointing fingers when things go wrong instead of actually trying to solve the problem. The absolute worst moment is when the mob of diseased people attacks SpongeBob's protective bubble until it pops, releasing a massive cloud of fungal spores that instantly infects everyone there at once. It's like watching a biological weapon go off and destroy an entire crowd of people in seconds, which is way too intense and scary for a kid's show. The entire Krusty Krab gets covered in thick, nasty fungal growth, and every single character turns into these infected zombie versions of themselves. The whole restaurant looks like something out of a post-apocalyptic horror movie where alien parasites have taken over everything, turning a place kids recognize into this completely unrecognizable nightmare landscape. Then, they discover that Gary can eat the fungus and cure people, which sounds great until you really think about what's happening. This snail is literally consuming infected body parts and diseased tissue, which is revolting on every level. But of course, Mr. Krabs, being the greedy guy that he is, immediately sees a business opportunity and starts charging people money to get cured by Gary. So now you've got this sick situation where Mr. Krabs is profiting off of a biological disaster, turning a public health emergency into his own personal money-making scheme, while people are literally dying from fungal infections. It shows kids that even during life or death crises, there is always going to be a scumbag ready to exploit people suffering for profit. This episode basically taught kids that disease outbreaks, government quarantines, and mass infections are just funny cartoon jokes instead of serious real-world problems that kill people. Fungus Among Us took a full-blown pandemic scenario with hazmat teams and quarantine protocols and turned it into entertainment, which is pretty messed up when you think about how it might make kids react to actual health emergencies. The way they solved the whole crisis by having Gary eat the fungus sends this terrible message that complex medical disasters can be fixed with simple, magical solutions instead of actual medicine and proper treatment. Even worse, the episode normalizes a bunch of really disturbing stuff. People getting physically transformed by disease, angry mobs attacking sick people, and greedy businessmen making money off of medical emergencies, and presents all of this as totally normal and acceptable. It's like the writers took every nightmare aspect of a real pandemic and decided to make it into a comedy for children, which could seriously screw up how kids understand public health and disease outbreaks when they actually happen in the real world. After unleashing a citywide plague through negligence and fear, the show dares to go further by isolating its main character until obsession erases his identity from history. Subscribe and let's get back to the video. Spongehenge is a messed up episode about SpongeBob going completely insane and ending with his entire world getting destroyed and everyone he knows being dead. The episode starts with this insanely powerful windstorm that turns Bikini Bottom into a total nightmare where nobody can live normal lives anymore. This is like the apocalypse hit and everything's going to hell, with characters getting beaten down by weather that's way too intense for them to handle. SpongeBob finds out that when the wind blows through his holes, it makes music that attracts jellyfish, which seems cute at first, but is obviously going to turn into a disaster. You've got this creepy moon and sun with human faces watching everything, which makes it clear that this isn't normal weather, but some kind of supernatural horror show that's messing with their reality. At first, the jellyfish seem friendly and magical, playing into SpongeBob's love of sea creatures and his innocent view of the world. But they quickly turn aggressive and dangerous. When Mr. Krabs has to drag SpongeBob back to work with a fishing hook, it literally rips off his teeth and limbs, showing how their normal world has become this brutal, violent place where even simple tasks cause serious injury. The Krusty Krab gets completely destroyed by the wind, which basically means all the social structures in normal life everyone depends on are falling apart and disappearing. The real nightmare starts when SpongeBob can't escape these jellyfish no matter what he does, and he's stuck in this endless cycle of running and hiding that slowly drives him completely insane. Even Patrick, his supposed best friend, violently kicks him out and refuses to help, showing how quickly people will abandon you when things get tough, and leaving SpongeBob totally alone with nobody to turn to. SpongeBob ends up hiding in a cave like some kind of hermit, choosing to live in complete isolation rather than deal with the constant terror of being chased by creatures that used to be friendly. Then, he starts making stone statues of himself and having full conversations with them like they're actual people, which is a clear sign that his brain is completely fried from being alone for so long. He's having tea parties with rocks and confessing his problems to carved stone like it's his therapist, which shows just how far his mental health has collapsed. The guy starts doing complex math and making detailed plans for building more and more stone versions of himself, showing that this obsession has taken over his entire life, and he can't think about anything else. You can see his beard growing and his body getting weaker, proving he's been stuck in this cave for months or even years, wasting his entire existence on this pointless project. When his first stone statue makes music that actually scares away the jellyfish, instead of being happy and leaving the cave, he goes even deeper into his obsession and decides he needs to build bigger and bigger monuments.
When SpongeBob finally finishes his massive stone project, he's created these giant versions of himself that make creepy music when the wind blows through them. He arranges them in a circle in jellyfish fields like some kind of ancient cult monument, which suggests his insanity has somehow given him access to dark, supernatural knowledge that normal people shouldn't have. The jellyfish finally leave him alone, so he thinks he's won and solved his problem. But this victory has destroyed everything else in his life. The moment he thinks everything's okay, he goes back to find the Krusty Krab buried in sand and completely gone, which means civilization itself has collapsed while he was obsessing over his stupid statues. SpongeBob starts crying and screaming when he realizes that his obsession didn't just cost him his job. It cost him his entire world, and everyone he ever cared about is probably dead. He spent so much time hiding in a cave playing with rocks that he completely missed the complete destruction of his reality, and now he's alone in a dead world with nothing but his creepy stone monuments. The horrible truth that SpongeBob's entire world got wiped out while he was playing with rocks creates a level of existential nightmare that goes way beyond normal cartoon punishment. The fact that the Krusty Krab is buried so deep suggests that decades, or maybe even centuries, have passed while he was obsessing in his cave, making him basically a living fossil who survived the complete extinction of everyone he knew. There's no sign of Mr. Krabs, Squidward, Patrick, Gary, or anyone else. They're all gone, leaving SpongeBob completely alone as possibly the last member of his species in a dead world. Those stone monuments he built to fix his jellyfish problem have basically become gravestones, marking the death of his old life and everyone in it. The sick irony is that he actually solved the problem he was so obsessed with, but in doing so, he lost everything that made his life worth living in the first place. His victory over the jellyfish turned into the ultimate defeat, because now he's trapped in a world where nobody is left to care about his success, and there's nothing left of the life he was trying to protect. The final bombshell that 3,000 years have passed turns this from just SpongeBob going crazy into full-blown cosmic horror about how completely meaningless individual lives are in the grand scheme of time. Alien tourists are studying SpongeBob's stone monuments like they're some kind of mysterious ancient artifacts, which means an entire alien civilization evolved and developed space travel while this guy was wasting his life building statues. These aliens have no clue who made the monuments or why, which means SpongeBob's entire identity and existence have been completely erased from history like he never existed at all. The episode basically shows SpongeBob's death without actually killing him on screen. Viewers just watch someone's obsession literally consume their entire existence, until there was nothing left. This episode dumps heavy concepts about deep time and the collapse of civilizations that are usually safe for adult science fiction, sneaking existential horror and thoughts about death and cosmic meaninglessness into a kid's show and forcing children to confront how insignificant their lives really are. After isolating its main character until civilization crumbles around his forgotten legacy, the show then blames ignorance and fear for burning that civilization to the ground. Wormy shows SpongeBob and Patrick being so clueless that they destroy an entire city over a butterfly. This episode basically taught kids that ignorance and panic are totally fine, and you can cause mass destruction as long as you think you're helping. Sandy decides to leave town and asks SpongeBob and Patrick to watch her pets, which is already a questionable idea since these two can barely take care of themselves. She's got a bunch of animals in her tree dome, including Wormy, this little caterpillar that becomes her new best friend. The setup is perfect for disaster because Sandy is literally the only smart person around, and now she's gone. Her tree dome creates this isolated environment where natural processes can happen without anyone understanding what's going on. SpongeBob and Patrick get super attached to this caterpillar and spend the whole day playing with him, like he's their new buddy, treating him like a regular pet instead of a creature that's going to change. But here's the thing, they have absolutely no clue how nature works, so when they leave overnight and come back the next day, they're completely unprepared for what they're going to find. The overnight timing becomes crucial because it gives Wormy enough time to transform completely while they're away. Sandy's not there to explain basic science to them, which means these two are about to make the worst possible assumptions about what happened to their friend. When they get back, Wormy is gone and there's this butterfly flying around instead. Any normal person would think, oh, caterpillars turn into butterflies, but not these guys. They see the empty cocoon and immediately decide some monster ate their friend and is now flying around looking for more victims. The episode uses real footage of a close-up butterfly face, which admittedly looks pretty creepy, but that doesn't excuse their complete lack of thinking. Instead of asking questions or pausing for 2 seconds, they decide this butterfly is a killer that needs to be stopped. SpongeBob catches it in a bubble, thinking he's captured a murderer, but then makes the brilliant move of releasing it outside where it can hurt other people. This is the moment their cluelessness stops being just their problem and becomes everyone else's nightmare. These two rush to the Krusty Krab screaming about a monster on the loose, completely convinced their hero's saving the day. Squidward and Mr. Crab think they're being ridiculous, which they are, but then the butterfly shows up and everyone loses their minds. The episode shows all these adults screaming and running around from a harmless butterfly like it's going to kill them. What makes this even worse is how the panic spreads from person to person, with each new victim adding to the chaos. The panic spreads like wildfire, with people abandoning their homes and businesses because they're too scared to think straight. Buildings start catching fire, citizens are fleeing in terror, and the entire city turns into a disaster zone. The episode shows people literally running from their lives from something that couldn't hurt them if it tried. All because nobody stopped for 1 second to think, hey, maybe this is just a regular butterfly. The episode basically shows how people can get when they let fear take over their brains, turning something beautiful into the cause of total destruction. The whole city gets burned to the ground over a butterfly. Let that sink in for a minute. SpongeBob and Patrick are standing in the smoking ruins feeling proud of themselves for warning everybody, completely clueless that they just caused the apocalypse. When Sandy comes back from her trip, she finds her hometown destroyed and everyone traumatized by what they think is some kind of monster. She takes one look at the butterfly and goes, oh, that's just Wormy. He turned into a butterfly. Like it's the most obvious thing in the world. Which it is. She catches him with zero effort and suddenly everybody realizes they just destroyed their entire city over nothing. The citizens cheer like Sandy just saved them from certain death, when really she just picked up a completely harmless insect that wouldn't hurt a fly. This episode basically told kids that being ignorant is hilarious and destroying things through panic is just good fun. The fact that an entire civilization got wiped out over a butterfly became this twisted joke instead of the horrifying cautionary tale it should have been. Children watching this learn that you don't need to know anything about the world around you, and if you get scared, it's totally fine to make everyone else scared too. The episode accidentally showed exactly how fake news and conspiracy theories spread in real life, with well-meaning people causing way more damage than any actual threat. Parents watching with their kids had to explain why an entire city got destroyed over something so harmless, which wasn't exactly the fun family viewing experience they signed up for. But instead of treating this as a serious warning about the dangers of ignorance, the show presented it as a comedy entertainment for kids. The visual of buildings burning and people fleeing in terror became just another punchline rather than the disturbing consequence it should have been. The message became that scientific education doesn't matter, critical thinking is optional, and mass hysteria is just another fun adventure. This episode proved that children's television had completely lost sight of its educational responsibility, choosing to laugh at ignorance instead of teaching kids why knowledge and rational thinking actually matter in the real world. After ignorance burns a city to the ground over a butterfly, the show dares to suggest that protecting what you love too much might be even more destructive. Squidward in Clarinet Land. Clarinet Land turns Squidward's unhealthy obsession with his clarinet into a straight-up nightmare trip through weird psychological hell that makes you question what's real and what's just in his screwed-up head. The episode starts with Squidward actually being happy for once because he's got some clarinet recital coming up, showing that the instrument is literally the only thing that makes his life worth living. Even though he gets beaten up all day at work, doors smashed into him, getting punched by stinky breath, the usual abuse, he stays cheerful as long as his precious clarinet is okay, which shows how pathetically his entire emotional well-being depends on one material object. The second some baby drools on his clarinet case, Squidward goes from happy to completely enraged, proving how unstable his mental state is and how far he'll go to protect his obsession. Mr. Krabs gives him this creepy Navy locker that still has dead human remains from Corporal Sterling inside, which is basically like storing your stuff in a coffin rather than a safe space. SpongeBob, being his usual self, decides to clean and share the locker, setting up the innocent actions that are going to completely destroy Squidward's sanity. The whole Krusty Krab becomes this high-pressure nightmare where Squidward's desperate need to control everything crashes headfirst into the daily chaos and SpongeBob's annoying attempts to be nice. The nightmare kicks off when Squidward keeps hearing SpongeBob messing around with the locker, making weird construction noises that drive him crazy with worry about his clarinet's safety. SpongeBob's helpful improvements are exactly what Squidward can't handle: change, chaos, and other people screwing with his personal stuff that he needs to keep perfect and controlled. When Squidward opens the locker and finds that SpongeBob turned it into some kind of elaborate room maze, you can't tell if this is just cartoon weirdness or if Squidward's mind is completely snapping from the stress. Then there's this insane card catalog system, where finding your own stuff becomes this bureaucratic hell of endless procedures and paperwork that make no sense and gets you nowhere. SpongeBob leaves these cryptic notes, sending Squidward on a wild goose chase through different locations, which feels less like a fun treasure hunt and more like deliberate psychological torture designed to drive him insane. The worst part is SpongeBob's annoying laughter echoing through the whole locker system, making it feel like he's watching and messing with Squidward on purpose, turning his innocent helpfulness into something creepy and threatening. When Squidward gets to this weird clarinet land place, a forest made entirely of clarinets, he meets this terrifying giant eagle head called the Keeper that starts messing with his brain about who really owns what. This bizarre landscape shows that Squidward's obsession has gotten so bad that he's literally created his own alternate reality based entirely around his stupid instrument. The Keeper starts asking deep questions about whether Squidward actually owns his clarinet, which completely screws with his head because his entire identity is built around owning this thing rather than actually being good at music. When the eagle gets violent and grabs him with its nasty tongue before swallowing him whole, the episode turns from mind games into straight up body horror that punishes Squidward for being so materialistic and shallow. Once he's inside the Keeper's stomach, chasing SpongeBob becomes this completely insane journey through impossible places like pinball machines and outer space that make no sense whatsoever. The vacuum explosion that blasts Squidward into space shows how his desperate hunt for his clarinet has taken him so far from reality that he's literally floating in the void, completely disconnected from anything that makes logical sense. The ending shows that Squidward's whole nightmare trip was supposedly just a dream or mental breakdown, but the episode deliberately keeps you guessing about what actually happened versus what was in his head. When he comes out of the locker looking completely melted and traumatized, it's clear that whether it was real or not, the experience seriously messed him up. Then, SpongeBob casually mentions he had the clarinet the whole time, to keep it safe, which means Squidward's entire hellish journey was completely pointless and based on him jumping to the wrong conclusions about everything. Instead of learning anything positive from his traumatic experience, Squidward becomes even more of a vindictive jerk and throws SpongeBob in the locker, shipping him off to far, far away as revenge. The final scene where Squidward screams and runs away from his own clarinet recital shows that his unhealthy obsession has completely backfired and prevented him from doing the one thing he actually cared about in the first place. This episode goes way beyond normal SpongeBob content by showing how being obsessed with your stuff can completely destroy your mental health and ruin relationships with people who actually care about you. Clarinet Land proves that trying to protect something too much can be worse than whatever you're protecting it from, since Squidward's paranoia about his clarinet stops him from actually playing it when it matters. The weird imagery and mind-bending questions create this existential nightmare that forces viewers to think about their own unhealthy attachments to material crap that they don't need. The way the episode mixes dream and reality reflects how anxiety and obsession work in real life, where the threats you imagine in your head can mess you up just as much as the actual problems. The really depressing part is that SpongeBob's genuine attempts to help get twisted into threats by Squidward's paranoid brain, showing how possessiveness and fear can turn even the nicest gestures into something sinister. Years later, this episode remains one of the most psychologically messed up in the entire series, using abstract weirdness and surreal storytelling to tackle themes that belong in adult psychological horror rather than kids' cartoons. After spiraling into madness over an instrument he never really lost, the next descent shows someone who loses everything, even the rules of reality, just for taking the wrong bus. If you're liking the video so far, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Rock Bottom turns getting on the wrong bus into a complete nightmare where SpongeBob gets trapped in this alien world full of creepy creatures that he can't understand and nobody who cares about helping him. The episode starts with SpongeBob and Patrick having a normal, fun day at Glove World like any regular people would, which makes what happens next feel even more horrifying because it shows how quickly innocent fun can turn into a nightmare. They accidentally get on the wrong bus, which is the kind of simple mistake anyone could make, but it leads to them getting completely screwed over in the worst possible way. The bus ride down this steep cliff is literally like descending into hell, taking them from their normal world into something that's fundamentally wrong and twisted. When Patrick ditches him without a second thought, it's the first major betrayal that sets up the psychological horror that's coming. Rock Bottom is designed to be the complete opposite of everything SpongeBob knows. It's dark and creepy instead of bright and cheerful, full of weird alien creatures instead of normal fish, and runs on completely different rules that make no sense. The whole aphotic zone thing creates the scientifically realistic but absolutely terrifying environment where sunlight never reaches, making it feel like SpongeBob has literally fallen into an underwater version of hell. The real nightmare starts when SpongeBob realizes he's completely screwed and alone in a world where he doesn't understand how anything works, which creates this building panic that gets worse every time he tries to escape and fails miserably. His desperate attempts to catch buses become more and more unhinged and stupid, showing how being isolated and stressed out can
make you do increasingly dumb things that just make your situation worse. All this ridiculous schemes to trick the buses, making cardboard fake people and disguising himself as furniture, might seem funny, but they're actually showing someone so desperate to get out they'll do absolutely anything, no matter how insane it is. Then, he finds out he has to wait in this impossibly long line at the bus station, which turns into this bureaucratic hell where simple things become completely impossible to accomplish. The fact that everyone has to make raspberry sounds between words creates this communication barrier that makes SpongeBob a total outsider who can't properly talk to anyone around them. The worst moment is when he misses the last bus by literally seconds, which is this crushing blow where his hope gets ripped away right when he thought he was finally going to escape. When SpongeBob gets thrown into what he calls advanced darkness, he's dealing with a level of isolation and terror that goes way beyond normal scary stuff into full-blown existential nightmare territory. His flashlight dying on him shows how all the normal tools and technology that usually make you feel safe are completely useless in this hostile hellscape, leaving him with nothing but his own breaking mind to keep him alive. The creepy raspberry sounds echoing through the darkness make it feel like invisible predators are hunting him, turning what was just a weird speech pattern into something that sounds genuinely threatening and dangerous. When he crashes into the steep cliff and starts bleeding, it adds real physical harm to all the psychological torture he's already been going through, proving that his desperate situation has become actually life-threatening. The mysterious red light coming through the darkness could either be a salvation or something that's going to kill him, creating maximum fear because you have no idea if SpongeBob's about to be rescued or eaten alive. When it turns out the light is from a friendly anglerfish, it provides relief, but only after SpongeBob has been pushed to his absolute mental breaking point of pure terror and hopelessness. Getting out on that balloon gets SpongeBob away from the place, but it doesn't fix how screwed up his head is from being stuck in that place for hours. His sarcastic comments about the balloon rescue show the experience really messed him up, turning his usual thankful personality into this defensive joking that's hiding some serious mental damage. The balloon popping right when he gets home shows exactly how easily his escape could fall apart, like all that rock-bottom trauma could come crashing back into his regular life whenever. The really messed up part is nobody else has any clue what happened to him, so he's stuck with dealing with this traumatic nightmare all by himself. This episode went way beyond normal SpongeBob content by creating genuinely terrifying stuff about being isolated, dealing with scary foreign places, and trying to survive in hostile environments that seriously disturbs a lot of viewers. Rock Bottom basically shows every kid's worst nightmare: being lost, alone, and unable to talk with anyone in a place where nothing makes sense and no grown-up can save you. The deep ocean setting with all those bizarre creatures hits those deep fears about the unknown parts of the sea, places where normal human logic doesn't work, and alien things follow rules that make no sense. Years later, Rock Bottom is still one of the most genuinely disturbing episodes in kids' TV, using isolation horror and fear of foreign places to create something that feels more like a David Lynch psychological thriller than a cartoon. After barely surviving the terror of being lost in an alien world, SpongeBob returns home, only to face something far worse: a world that chooses to abandon him on purpose. Gone is a messed up episode about SpongeBob's worst fear: being totally abandoned by everyone he cares about, actually happening and driving him completely insane in the most disturbing way possible. The episode starts with SpongeBob doing his normal morning stuff, showing all the comfortable routines of his daily life before completely destroying every single person he depends on for social connection. When he finds out Gary's missing, it's the first sign that something's wrong. But SpongeBob stays optimistic and figures his pet just got up early for once, going through his usual daily interactions, trying to wake up Squidward, saying hi to Patrick, heading to work, shows that everyone in his life has vanished through these increasingly creepy one-sided conversations where he's talking to nobody. The empty Krusty Krab destroys SpongeBob's work identity and daily purpose, leaving him with nothing to do and nowhere to belong. His systemic search through everyone's houses turns into this detective story, where each empty home becomes proof that something terrible has happened to everyone he knows. The visual emptiness of the whole town creates this apocalyptic feeling that suggests something horrible happened to the entire world, and SpongeBob's the only survivor. The real nightmare starts when SpongeBob's frantic searching leads him to the terrible realization that he might be the only living thing left in the world, which creates this existential horror about being completely abandoned and isolated forever. His decision to keep Bikini Bottom's memory alive by pretending to be everyone else is his first sign of his psychological breakdown, where he's using elaborate role-playing to avoid facing the fact that he's totally alone. The montage of SpongeBob imitating all his friends seems funny at first, but gets increasingly disturbing when you realize he's basically talking to himself to prevent a complete mental collapse. His breakdown during the Mrs. Puff impression, crying that he can't replace everyone and will never be happy again, is when reality comes crashing through his desperate attempts to lie to himself. His relationship with Bodhi goes from simple friendship to unhealthy obsession, as SpongeBob dumps all his human social needs onto a piece of junk because he has nobody else. Making the Krabby Patty Patrick puppet shows his complete descent into madness, as he literally builds friends out of food and has full conversations with his own creations like they're real people. The climax hits peak horror when SpongeBob's paranoia makes him see every car and bus as a threat, showing how his total isolation has destroyed his ability to tell dangers that are real from imaginary ones. The scene where he hides in bushes and screams at any vehicle isn't cartoon comedy. It's genuinely scary. It's genuinely disturbing, as his fears have grown beyond normal worry into crippling anxiety that completely controls what he does. His panicked running through town, fleeing from boats, screaming at car movies, and finally grabbing an axe as a weapon shows someone having a complete psychological breakdown who becomes dangerous to himself and possibly other people. When he attacks the approaching bus with an axe, it's the ultimate destruction of his peaceful personality, turning SpongeBob from an innocent optimist into someone who's willing to use violence because his mind has been completely snapped. When all the Bikini Bottom residents come out of the bus, it creates this surreal moment where SpongeBob's nightmare suddenly stops, but the psychological damage is already done, and can't be undone. The casual reveal that his abandonment was totally planned, a national No SpongeBob Day, turns his suffering from a tragic accident into deliberate cruelty by everyone he trusted and loved most. But it turns out that SpongeBob's psychological torture was totally planned by his friends and neighbors, and this creates a devastating betrayal that shows his entire nightmare was actually community-approved abuse. Mr. Krabs casually saying they milked it a little shows he doesn't give a damn about the psychological damage they caused, treating SpongeBob's mental breakdown like acceptable collateral damage for getting a vacuum from him. The flashback showing the whole town burning a SpongeBob dummy and dancing on the ashes reveals how much they all secretly hate him, turning what should be loving friendships into something that looks like straight up hatred. SpongeBob's pathetic gratitude for being honored with his own day shows how completely his self-worth has been destroyed, as he twists deliberate cruelty into some kind of twisted appreciation. Patrick casually mentioning No Patrick Day immediately triggers another round of abandonment, proving that this cycle of social rejection and psychological torture is just normal behavior in their screwed up community. This goes way beyond normal SpongeBob content by showing genuinely disturbing stuff about social rejection, community bullying, and psychological abuse disguised as harmless cartoon fun. Gone basically shows an entire town conspiring to psychologically torture one person for their own entertainment, making bullying and social isolation look like totally acceptable community activities. The casual way they treat SpongeBob's mental breakdown, complete with paranoia, hallucinations, and violent outbursts, as comedy, sends really messed up messages about mental health and what happens when you isolate people. The ending where everybody comes back and expects SpongeBob to be grateful for their deliberate cruelty reflects real-world emotional abuse patterns, where victims get manipulated into feeling thankful for their own mistreatment. Years later, Gone is still one of the most accidentally dark episodes in kids' TV, using cartoon comedy as a cover to explore systematic emotional abuse, community gaslighting, and the devastating psychological damage that deliberate social isolation causes. After being deliberately abandoned and pushed to the edge of madness by his friends, SpongeBob tries to fix a friend's depression, only to become the source of torment himself. But before I tell you about that episode, make sure you're subscribed. Are You Happy Now is a messed up episode about SpongeBob trying to cure Squidward's depression through constant harassment that ends up driving his neighbor to a complete mental breakdown. The episode starts with SpongeBob being ridiculously happy about his work schedule memories, while Squidward admits that he doesn't have any happy memories at all, which is actually a pretty realistic way to show clinical depression when you can't remember good times. SpongeBob's immediate freakout at this news shows he's completely clueless about mental illness and can't respect that it's a real thing people deal with. Having this whole psychological intervention happen at the Krusty Krab makes it totally inappropriate and invasive, since Squidward can't get away from SpongeBob's unwanted help, even at work. SpongeBob's cabinet stuffed with backup memory books shows he's obsessively documenting his own happiness, which suggests he's got some unhealthy fixation on staying positive all the time. The whole setup creates this unequal power dynamic where SpongeBob's aggressive optimism bulldozes over Squidward's depression, making the helper have all the control while the patient becomes a victim of forced treatment he never asked for. The real nightmare starts when SpongeBob's attempts to force happiness on Squidward keep screwing up badly, creating this pattern of psychological torture disguised as help where every time he tries to fix things, he just causes more damage. The concert disaster where Squidward gets a violin bow jabbed in his eye shows how SpongeBob's pushy positivity creates dangerous situations that actually hurt people physically. The museum thing is the most brutal kind of hope manipulation. Squidward finally gets to feel real joy seeing his art on display, only to watch some critic torch it with a flamethrower right in his face. This cycle of building someone up just to tear them down over and over is straight up messed up, where the victim gets a taste of happiness just so they can get it brutally ripped away. Every time SpongeBob fails, Squidward gets more depressed, but SpongeBob keeps pushing this help without realizing he's making everything way worse. The 2 weeks Squidward spends hiding shows him trying to recover from all the repeated trauma, but even his attempt to protect himself gets treated like another problem that needs fixing. SpongeBob's harassment turns into full-blown stalking that crosses every line imaginable, turning his so-called help into criminal behavior that drives Squidward to a total mental breakdown. SpongeBob completely refuses to leave Squidward alone, and when he obviously wants to be left the hell alone, getting more violent and creepy, climbing on Gary to peep through windows and breaking into Squidward's house through his damn fax machine. SpongeBob's final screw-up, kidnapping Squidward in a box and dragging him to some party he never wanted, is where helping becomes actual kidnapping and imprisonment. The party shows how completely nuts SpongeBob has gotten, admitting nobody else would show up because they're all busy or sick, but still forcing Squidward into a room crammed with 100 life-size versions of himself. This nightmare turned SpongeBob from some annoying neighbor into a creepy stalker who built a weird shrine to himself and trapped his victim inside it. When Squidward violently destroys all those papier-mâché SpongeBobs, it's a complete mental snap where all his pent-up rage finally explodes into pure violence. The immediate celebration of Squidward's violent breakdown as his happiest memory creates this really disturbing ending that makes aggression look like a healthy way to deal with depression and harassment. SpongeBob's excited reaction to watching Squidward destroy copies of him shows he's either completely clueless about what violence actually means, or he's getting some sick satisfaction from finally breaking his neighbor's mind. The episode treating destructive rage like some kind of therapeutic breakthrough sends really dangerous messages about mental health, making it seem like violence and destruction are good ways to deal with depression instead of signs of serious trauma. Squidward's crazy laughter while he's destroying all those SpongeBob replicas shows someone having a complete mental break, not real happiness. But the episode acts like this psychological snap is actually a good thing. This episode presents a genuinely harmful way of showing depression and mental health that could seriously mess up how viewers think about these issues. Are You Happy Now basically teaches kids that constantly harassing depressed people is totally fine as long as you mean well, making stalking behavior look like carrying friendship. Showing Squidward's violent breakdown as his happiest memory sends really dangerous messages about mental health, making explosive rage and destructive behavior seem like healthy ways to heal instead of signs of serious psychological damage. The way the episode treats boundary violations, breaking into homes, ignoring when someone says no, and literally kidnapping people as normal friendship stuff teaches viewers to ignore consent and personal boundaries. Years later, Are You Happy Now is still one of the most psychologically damaging episodes in kids' TV, using mental health topics for cheap laughs while potentially screwing up viewers and teaching dangerous lessons about consent, boundaries, and healing. When relentless help becomes harassment that shatters a friend's mind, obsession soon escalates into full-blown stalking and identity theft. Squid's Visit is a disturbing episode about SpongeBob's desperate need for attention turning into full-blown stalking, where he completely copies Squidward's private life down to the creepiest details. The episode starts with SpongeBob wanting Squidward to come over to his house, which seems like normal neighbor stuff between co-workers at the Krusty Krab. Squidward clearly shoots down the invitation, calling SpongeBob's place a dirty little hovel, and saying he'd rather stay home, which is supposed to be boundary setting that should end the conversation right there. SpongeBob's refusal to accept this rejection shows the first signs of his unhealthy obsession, as he keeps pushing for the invitation even after getting told no. Patrick's suggestion to borrow something from Squidward brings in the criminal stuff that turns social awkwardness into actual theft and manipulation. The plan to force a visit by stealing Squidward's stuff shows that they don't give a damn about consent or personal rights, treating his belongings like tools to manipulate him socially. SpongeBob jumping on this scheme right away shows he's willing to cross basic ethical lines when his social needs get rejected, turning him from an annoying neighbor into an actually dangerous person who uses theft to force social interaction. The real nightmare starts when SpongeBob doesn't just steal Squidward's vacuum. He uses it as an excuse to spy on and copy every single detail of his neighbor's most private stuff without permission. The crazy level of detail in SpongeBob's fake house means he's been watching, photographing, and studying every part of Squidward's private life for months or maybe years without him knowing. SpongeBob knowing intimate details, the exact paint chip from when Squidward moved in, what's in his medicine cabinet, his mom's handmade pillow with her personal note, shows he's been systematically stalking way beyond normal neighbor knowledge. Copying 492 self-portraits proves SpongeBob has been secretly breaking into Squidward's house, going through his artwork, and probably committing breaking and entering over and over just to get this level of detail. SpongeBob casually acting like these violations are just bringing comfort to Squidward shows how he's completely disconnected from how criminal his actions are and how much trauma he's causing. The systematic copying turns SpongeBob's house into a creepy shrine dedicated to worshipping Squidward without his consent. When Squidward finds the room with all 492 of his self-portraits, it shows the full scope of SpongeBob's criminal behavior and how he completely stole Squidward's artistic identity and creative work. This is the ultimate privacy invasion. SpongeBob didn't just steal personal stuff, but systematically cataloged and copied his most intimate creative work without any permission. Squidward, realizing that the copies are better than mine, adds psychological torture on top of the physical violation, since his stalker didn't just steal his work but made it better, making him feel like crap compared to his own stolen identity. The bathroom scene where Squidward keeps slipping on his own rash cream while SpongeBob watches shows how helpless a victim becomes when trapped in a copy of their own space, where even familiar stuff gets turned into weapons against them. Finding out his real house burned down while he was stuck in the fake one creates the perfect prison situation, where SpongeBob's criminal actions eliminated Squidward's escape route and forced him into total dependence on his stalker. The result is Squidward having a total mental breakdown and completely shutting down when he realizes he's stuck living forever in this fake version of his stolen life, with no way to get away from his stalker. His fantasy about having tea with his vacuum cleaner shows he's completely lost touch with reality, making up imaginary friends instead of dealing with how screwed up his situation is. SpongeBob's happy offer for Squidward to stay at my house until you get your house fixed shows how he's planned this whole thing, since burning down the real house means Squidward can never escape this fake prison. The ending with SpongeBob and Gary sleeping outside while Squidward lives in the replica creates this sick setup where the stalker acts all generous while keeping total control over his victim's life. The episode acts like this forced living situation is a happy ending, making it look normal for a stalking victim to get trapped with their stalker. This goes way beyond normal SpongeBob content by showing genuinely disturbing stalking, identity theft, and victim imprisonment while making serious criminal behavior look like quirky friendship stuff. Squid's visit basically shows how real stalkers work, systematically gathering info on their victims, violating their privacy, and then using destruction or manipulation to force contact that makes them dependent. The casual way they treat breaking and entering, theft, spying, and forced living situations as comedy sends really dangerous messages about consent, privacy, and personal boundaries in relationships. The ending where the victim gets forced to live with their stalker and this gets presented as a good thing reflects real-world patterns where stalking victims get trapped with their abusers through money or housing problems. Years later, House Fancy is still one of the most accidentally disturbing episodes in kids' TV, using stalking and identity theft as plot points while potentially making these behaviors seem normal to young viewers who might not realize how criminal SpongeBob's actions really are. These episodes show how friendship can go wrong when caring turns into hurting, breaking trust and personal space. They make us think twice about how cartoons talk about feelings, boundaries, and being kind to others.
If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.